After 30 years of marriage, I discovered that Xiao Chu had kept a mistress outside the mansion. It turned out that the real reason he had lingered at the border, refusing to lay down his armor and return home, was that he already had a whole family, wife and children, with that woman. Even my own son and daughter had known about this all along, yet they had colluded with Xiao Chu to deceive me for half my life. Upon learning the truth, I went to the palace to submit a memorial, begging the emperor for a decree to dissolve our marriage. I had just received the imperial edict when Xiao Chu, now 50 years old, returned to the general's mansion at the Gallop. Luo Chishu, aren't you ashamed to demand a divorce at your age? His temples streaked with white. Xiao Chu frowned deeply. Slamming the memorial he had intercepted onto the ground, I sat on a chair, weaving a tiger head shoe for my grandson, and replied calmly, "No, I am not." Perhaps my indifference took him aback. For Xiao Chu softened his tone. "If you're upset because I didn't come home for your birthday this year, I apologize. You know how tied down I am, garrisoning the border," he explained patiently, still convinced that his long absence was the only reason his aging wife was insisting on a divorce. He had never been one to come home often. In 30 years of marriage, today marked only the 10th time he had set foot in the general's mansion. I set down the half-finished tiger head shoe. "Were you really too busy defending the border to come home?" Xiao Chu froze for a split second. "What are you suspecting me of, Luo Chishu? You live a life of ease at home, with one foot already in the grave. Stop thinking about such nonsense." A cold laugh echoed in my heart. He had panicked at the mere question, proof enough of his guilty conscience. After all, ours was a marriage blessed by the late emperor himself, a match made in gold and jade, 30 years ago. The late emperor had bestowed this marriage upon the Luo and Xiao clans. Our relationship had never been particularly affectionate, but we had always treated each other with mutual respect and courtesy. Once, clad in his armor, Xiao Chu had sworn to me, "Achi, the Luo family is an illustrious aristocratic clan. Now that you have married me, I shall never betray you." But last month, on the 7th day of the 11th lunar month, Xiao Chu's birthday, feeling strong and healthy despite my years, I had made a special trip to the border, wanting to surprise him and celebrate his 50th birthday. But there, in that border residence, I had seen it all. In the open courtyard, Xiao Chu held a child of about 2 years old in his arms, his expression soft as he fed the little one fruit. The golden sunset gilded his imposing armor, and the child babbled, reaching out to grab the tassels hanging from it. "Grandpa, Grandpa," at a large round table nearby. 9 young men and women, all around the same age as my son, were seated. "Father, come eat quickly. Mother and we are here to celebrate your birthday." A woman dressed plainly emerged from the kitchen, carrying dishes. Xiao Chu immediately stepped forward to take them from her hands. Their eyes met, and the deep affection in their gazes stabbed like a knife into my heart. In that moment, it finally dawned on me. All these years, his garrisoning the border had meant living in this very courtyard, building a complete family with another woman. The heartwarming scene of their big, happy family made me realize that all my years of waiting and enduring alone in the capital had been nothing but a joke. That very night, I boarded the carriage back to the capital. I had decided to set myself free with this divorce, and to grant everyone involved a modicum of dignity. But now, Xiao Chu had intercepted my divorce memorial, preventing me from going to the palace to see the emperor. Seeing me remain silent, Xiao Chu assumed I was still nursing my grievances and anger. He sighed, then sat down on the edge of the bed as if making a great sacrifice. "Very well, I shall stay in your courtyard tonight. Achi, stop being stubborn. Once, in my youth, I would have been overjoyed at the prospect, but now," I merely cast him a faint glance. "There's no need. We are both too old for such things." Truth be told, at our age, I knew he was no longer capable of anything intimate. I simply did not want him lying beside me. Xiao Chu's patience wore thin at my apparent ingratitude, irritation flickering across his face. I shall lead my troops back to the capital next month, and live in the general's mansion from now on. We shall never be separated again. Will this finally make you happy? With that, he rubbed his wrist, old injury flaring up, and strode toward the door. I watched his tall, straight figure retreating, and for a moment, I could see the young man he had once been. His wrist had been injured long ago from years of wielding a heavy sword. The pain always flared up whenever he rode a horse hard through the night. Once, seeing him in pain would have filled me with heartache, and I would have personally prepared medicinal ointment to apply to his wound. But now, I stood up, gathered all the ointments I had ever made for him, and threw them into the dry well in the courtyard. From this day forward, I would cast off all the grievances I had endured in this marriage, including Xiao Chu himself. The bright moon hung high in the sky. I spent the entire night packing, sorting through everything that had once belonged to Xiao Chu and me, clearing it all out. So what if I was past 50? I refused to spend the rest of my life tied to a man who had deceived me for half of it. The room was littered with odds and ends. I glanced around, deciding to burn some things and sink the rest in the well. By the time I finished, dawn had broken. I was just about to rest when my son, Xiao Fengye, hurried into the courtyard. Mother, I was surprised to see him. He should have been attending classes at the Imperial Academy at this hour. Xiao Fengye strode toward me, his expression grave. Mother, you are already advanced in years. Are you really making such a fuss about a divorce just because father kept a mistress at the border? A sharp pain pierced my heart. I looked straight into his eyes. How did you know about this? A flicker of unease crossed Xiao Fengye's face, but he quickly regained his cold composure, the very image of his father in his youth. Aunt Mu is a lone woman who has shared weal and woe with father at the border for 30 years. Their devotion is praised by every soldier there. How could I not know? Aunt Mu. The intimacy of the address struck me as ironic. This was the same son who had been weak and sickly as a child, whom I had held in my arms through countless sleepless nights, nursing him with endless patience, and now, he stood here, siding with an outsider against me. I supposed, in the eyes of father and son alike, a man keeping a mistress was nothing more than a trivial matter. An old woman like me should not, and could not, make such a big deal out of it. I did not argue with him. I only felt a sudden, profound regret for ever having given birth to him. Xiao Fengye, mistaking my silence for acquiescence, let out a sigh of relief. Mother, harmony in the family brings prosperity. Aunt Mu's presence will never threaten your position as the mistress of the general's mansion. Please, stop making such a fuss. And father is home for a rare visit today. Why don't you go cook him lunch? He always loved the dishes you made. I laughed bitterly. I am already this old, and you still want me to slave away in the kitchen. Why don't you ask your own wife to do it? Xiao Fengye frowned, clearly disapproving. She has taken the children back to her maiden home to visit her relatives. Besides, she is the legitimate daughter of the Mu family. She has never lifted a finger in the kitchen in her life. How could I possibly ask her to cook? His words filled my heart with even deeper coldness. I turned away from him and went back to my room to catch up on some sleep, paying him no further mind. By noon, seeing that I still refused to leave my courtyard, Xiao Fengye ordered the servants to prepare a lavish feast, setting it up in the main hall. For the first time in years, the three of us, husband, wife, and son, sat down to a meal together. Once, whenever Xiao Chu was present, I would always wait for him to take the first bite before I began eating. But today, I ignored him completely, picking up my chopsticks and starting to eat without a second glance. Instead of taking offense at my rudeness, Xiao Chu studied my expression thoughtfully before speaking up. Achi. When I lead my troops back to the capital next month, I will be bringing a woman with me from the border. I kept my head down, silently picking at my food. Xiao Chu glanced at me again, then continued. We have lived apart for so many years, it was impossible for me to remain alone all this time. You could not accompany me at the border, so I had no choice but to build a small family there. There was even a hint of blame in his words, as if I were the one at fault. How absurd. I let out a faint and said nothing more. He had forgotten that he could have returned home at any time simply by handing over the tiger tally of the Northern Border Army. He had forgotten that I had once been a woman who could ride and shoot, galloping across the battlefield, but after marrying him, I had laid down my sword and picked up a spatula, cooking for him day in and day out. Xiao Chu seemed taken aback by my calm reaction to the revelation of a secret he had kept for decades. He looked somewhat uneasy, but having opened his mouth, he pressed on, forcing himself to state his plans clearly. Men of status all have multiple wives and concubines. Yet all these years, I have never brought any other woman into this mansion. Ayun is getting on in years too, and life at the border is harsh and bitter. I want to bring her here to live out her remaining years in comfort. I could not bear to listen any longer. I slammed my chopsticks down on the table with a sharp clatter. Sensing the tension in the air, my son Xiao Fengye quickly jumped in to smooth things over. Father's triumphant return to the capital and his decision to take another wife are double blessings for our family. The general's mansion has been so quiet these past years, it's practically haunted. Son only wishes there were more people in the mansion to liven things up. Listening to the son I had borne with half my life's blood and raised with painstaking care utter such words, I felt nothing but profound, crushing disappointment. Foolish boy, utterly idiotic. Was he so overconfident that he thought his status as the legitimate son would guarantee him the hereditary military honors of the general's mansion forever? Or was he simply too naive to realize that he would never be able to live in harmony with his half-siblings? But at that moment, Xiao Chu looked at Xiao Fengye with approval, his cloudy eyes lighting up. Truly, you are the only one who understands me, my son, encouraged by his father's praise. Xiao Fengye began to sing the mistress's praises even more enthusiastically. Aunt Mu has shared every hardship with father, serving him faithfully for all these years. Such a virtuous and devoted woman is a role model for all wives. She suffered. What about me? I had been born into a noble family, yet I had married into the Xiao clan. Enduring a marriage that had been no different from widowhood, I had given everything over these years, yet I had never won this man's heart. Nor had I ever received his understanding or true kindness. Even the son I had raised with blood, sweat, and tears had turned out just like his father, cold, ungrateful, and heartless toward me. I fixed my gaze on Xiao Fengye, on the son I had sacrificed so much to raise. If you think she is so perfect, then why don't you go and change your mother? Xiao Fengye's face froze instantly. Mother, that's not what I meant. Xiao Chu's expression also turned awkward. Ayun has never cared about the position of the general's mansion's mistress. There's no need to say such hurtful things to our son out of anger. Xiao Fengye quickly recovered his composure, nodding vigorously. Yes, mother, Aunt Mu's presence will never shake your status. You will always be my only mother. I sipped my wolfberry tea slowly, finding the father-son duo's coordinated act more absurd and laughable with each passing moment. This is the Xiao family's general's mansion. Do as you please. I had no desire to waste any more energy on this sordid mess, and intended to end the conversation right there. Just then, one of Xiao Chu's subordinates rushed into the hall, leaning in to whisper something in his ear. I faintly caught the words Madame Mu. A slight change came over Xiao Chu's face. He then turned to me, looking somewhat apologetic. I have some urgent military business to attend to. I must return to the border at once. I won't be able to finish this meal. I made no attempt to stop him. It was Xiao Fengye who looked on with a hint of reluctance in his eyes. Father, we haven't had a family reunion dinner together in years. Won't you stay and finish eating before you leave? Xiao Chu hesitated for a moment, then patted Xiao Fengye on the shoulder with a tinge of guilt. From now on, We'll be able to have family dinners together every single day. I watched father and son silently, then lowered my eyes. Let the future unfold as it may. I said nothing more, turning on my heel and walking straight back to Osmanthus courtyard. Days passed one after another, and I gradually cleared out all my belongings. When you grow old, you can't help but dwell on the past from time to time. I remembered the first year of our marriage, when Xiaochu had given me a little pony. I had bathed it, brushed its coat, and fed it with my own hands, but that pony had long since grown into an old horse. On the night I learned of Xiaochu's wife and children at the border, I personally buried it beneath the yellow earth. I dug out the family letters Xiaochu had once written to me. The paper had turned yellow with age, but I had kept them carefully all these years. His calligraphy was bold and powerful, bearing the distinct strength of the Yang and Liu schools. My dearest wife Luo Chishu, I have been away from the capital for a year, and I miss you more than words can say. The endless sandstorms at the border make me yearn for the capital. For being by your side every single moment. All is well here. Do not worry about me. Once, these words had been my anchor, sustaining me through years of guarding the vast general's mansion alone. Now, they seemed nothing but a glaring mockery. I tossed the letters into the stove one by one, watching them burn to ashes. I also ordered the servants to carry box after box of my belongings out of the mansion and sell them off. No one dared to utter a word of complaint, for everything being sold had been purchased with my own dowry money. It was not until New Year's Eve that I finally heard the news. Xiaochu had led his troops back to the capital. As soon as he entered the city, he went straight to the palace, using his decades of military achievements to beg the emperor for permission to take Mu Yunjin as his official wife of equal status. Later, he methodically bought the mansion adjacent to the general's mansion, settling Mu Yunjin there in comfort. The servants sweeping the snow whispered among themselves, I heard the general used the mistress's dowry money to buy that mansion for Mu Yunjin. It separated from the general's bamboo courtyard by nothing but a single wall, to make it easier for them to meet. The general even had the wall knocked down, merging the two mansions into one large compound. Once upon a time, hearing such words would have filled my heart with bitter sorrow, but now, I was old. What was the point of clinging to such grievances? As for my dowry money, after all these years, the entire general's mansion had been kept afloat by my dowry. There was no use in complaining about it now. I pretended not to hear their whispers and walked toward the gate of the general's mansion, only to bump straight into Xiaochu. He froze for a moment, then handed me a box of Osmanthus cakes he was holding. For you. I gestured for my nanny to take them, then turned to him and asked, why don't you let Mu Yunjin live in the general's mansion? Mention of his beloved made Xiaochu's expression soften. She disguised herself as a man and served in the military camp for 10 years. He explained, she is a free-spirited woman of the battlefield, unaccustomed to dealing with the women of the inner courtyard. That is why I let her live in the neighboring mansion. It keeps her happy, and it also spares you the trouble of having to see her, spares me the trouble. I laughed coldly to myself. Xiaochu thought I was still throwing a tantrum. He frowned, then took my hand in his. Chi, we have been husband and wife for decades. From now on, I will never leave you to guard this empty mansion alone again. I will come to your courtyard on the 1st and 15th day of every lunar month. For the rest of the time, I need to stay with Yunjin. After all these years, you are used to living without me by your side, but Yunjin is not. As the mistress of this mansion, you must be more understanding. His feigned affection made my heart ache with anger for a moment. What nerve did this old man have? He had used my money to support another woman and their children, bought them a mansion with it, and now he expected me to be understanding. As long as you are happy, I replied flatly. Now that I had made up my mind to leave, I had no desire to waste any more words on him. By noon, the winter sun blazed brightly overhead. I boarded my carriage and headed straight for the palace. I was going to beg Emperor Yi Hanqing for an imperial edict to sever this cursed bond between Xiao Chu and me once and for all. Before marrying into the Xiao family, Yi Hanqing and I had been childhood sweethearts. Back then, he had been nothing but the 9th prince, wandering among the noble families of the capital. He had even secretly climbed over the walls of the Luo mansion to bring me pastries. But after I married, we had gradually lost touch. I wondered if he still remembered me. Inside the palace, in the Golden Phoenix Hall, I caught sight of the figure in bright yellow robes seated on the imperial throne high above. Yi Hanqing was now approaching 50, yet he still pored over memorials with the same unwavering concentration he had shown in his youth. I knelt down and said in a clear voice, "This old woman Luo Chishu pays homage to your majesty." At the sound of my name, Yi Hanqing froze. He set down the memorial in his hand and studied me silently for a long moment. "Qi, 30 years have passed since we last met. You look much younger than I imagined." I was somewhat surprised by his words, and quickly bowed my head. "Thank you for your kind words, Your Majesty." Yi Hanqing gestured for me to rise and take a seat. His gaze as he looked at me was filled with a complex mix of emotions. I know that General Xiao returned to the capital in great pomp, bringing his mistress and their entire family of 3 generations, 58 people in total. He even used his military merits to secure an imperial edict allowing him to take Mu Yunjin as his equal wife. I know this matter has wronged you deeply. I shook my head and handed him the memorial I had brought with me. "Your Majesty, I have not come for this." Seeing the memorial, Yi Hanqing looked taken aback. "I heard that you once submitted a memorial requesting a divorce. But General Xiao intercepted it. Are you here today to plead for a divorce again?" I looked him straight in the eye and spoke each word clearly. "Not a divorce. I am here to repudiate my husband." Yi Hanqing let out a long, heavy sigh. "You are already at an age where repudiating your husband will make life difficult for you. Why not enter the palace and become my noble consort?" My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to leave Xiao Chu. But that did not mean I wanted to jump out of the frying pan and into the fire. I had found even sharing a bed with Xiao Chu repulsive enough. As the emperor, Yi Hanqing had 3,000 concubines in his harem. I could not afford to directly defy his wishes, so I declined politely. "Your Majesty, I am already an old woman. Entering your harem would be most improper." Yi Hanqing narrowed his phoenix eyes, clearly seeing through my reluctance. He sighed again. "I only wish to have you accompany me in the palace to fish and chat. If you are unwilling, then so be it." Fortunately, Yi Hanqing did not force me to stay. He readily issued the imperial edict allowing me to repudiate my husband, then let me take my leave. The moment I stepped out of the palace gates, I felt an immense sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from my aging shoulders, making me feel light and unburdened. Tonight was New Year's Eve. Since Mu Yunjin had just moved into the mansion, Xiao Chu had specially arranged the family reunion feast in her courtyard. All the children had gone, but I had declined to attend, citing poor health. Out of sight, out of mind. It would save me a great deal of trouble and annoyance. The sound of firecrackers and fireworks from the neighboring courtyard, mixed with the laughter and chatter of children, echoed through the night for hours on end. I lay awake in my Osmanthus courtyard the entire night. The next day, Xiao Chu came to see me. At 50, Xiao Chu's face bore the marks of age, but his eyes still held the same cold, stern look I remembered from years ago. "What brings the general to my humble courtyard?" I asked. He coughed awkwardly, looking almost embarrassed. "Today is the first day of the lunar month." I froze for a moment. Then it slowly dawned on me. He was here to keep his promise of visiting me on the 1st and 15th day of every month. But I, Luo Chishu, had lived alone for most of my life. How could I possibly care for the meager companionship he deigned to offer? I opened the drawer of my desk, about to take out the imperial edict of repudiation the emperor had given me, but Xiao Chu's voice stopped me in my tracks. Tomorrow is the second day of the lunar month. Our daughter will be coming home to visit her parents. Be sure to prepare properly for her arrival. Our daughter Xiao Lihua had married into the Eastern Palace last year, becoming the crown princess. Her visit on the second day of the Lunar New Year was a grand, formal affair. Xiao Chu walked over to me, hesitated for a moment, then reached out his calloused hand to wrap around my waist. My body stiffened. I pushed his hand away instinctively. I am unwell today, General. You should go find Mistress Mu instead. It was a lie. Of course, I had gone through menopause 3 years ago, but Xiao Chu had never paid the slightest attention to such matters concerning me. Being able to feel unwell like this is a good sign, he said cheerfully. Perhaps we can have another child together in the future. Xiao Chu rambled on, talking about how he had personally carved a small wooden sword for one of his grandsons, and a little wooden horse for one of his granddaughters. When I gave him another son in the future, he vowed he would personally make a cradle for the baby, and spend every day by its side admiring the flowers, raising fish, and enjoying his old age in peace. Listening to his absurd dreams of the future, I could not help but feel a bitter sense of irony. The man already had a house full of grandchildren, and yet he still expected me to bear him another son. How shameless could he be, all day long? I used my illness as an excuse to give Xiao Chu the cold shoulder. Growing bored and finding no joy in my company, he finally had no choice but to rise awkwardly and take his leave. I did not care where he went or who he went to see. I simply went back to packing my luggage, carefully taking stock of all the remaining money and belongings from my dowry. The second day of the first lunar month, the day for married daughters to visit their parents, Xiao Lihua returned to the general's mansion. Dressed in a magnificent royal robe, it had been a year since I last saw her, but instead of greeting me with warmth, she launched into a barrage of accusations and complaints the moment she laid eyes on me. Mother, how could you make such a fuss about divorcing father for no reason? If you leave the general's mansion, the entire world will laugh at me for having a mother who was cast out. If I lose my status as the legitimate daughter of a general, how will I ever become empress in the future? Listening to her endless stream of grievances and reproaches, my heart grew colder and colder with every word she spoke. I had risked half my life to give birth to this daughter. She had been weak and sickly since childhood. I had personally cooked for her every day, stewing fish soup and bird's nest to nourish her body. Fearing she would grow bored confined to the inner courtyard, I had secretly had a hidden door built in the back garden. Turning a blind eye whenever she snuck out to play, I had personally taught her how to draw a bow and wield a sword, telling her, if one day you find yourself in mortal danger, your skills in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting will not save you. Only by holding a sword and spear in your own hands can you truly protect yourself. As a little girl, Xiao Lihua had waved her tiny arms and legs excitedly, vowing solemnly, Mother, when I grow up, I will protect you every single day. The sweet little girl who had once called me mother with such affection was long gone. In her place stood this cold, unfamiliar woman, the crown princess. I swallowed down my overwhelming sense of disappointment and spoke to her calmly. I have wasted the best years of my life for you and your brother. Now, am I not even allowed to make a choice for myself without being berated like this? Xiao Lihua's face stiffened slightly. The crown prince does not truly love me. Without my status as the legitimate daughter of a general, he would never make me his empress. Mother, you must think of me more. A bitter laugh rose in my throat. They say that daughters are their mother's most devoted confidants, but my own daughter, she had turned out to be nothing but a disappointment. I had once told her that the palace was a bottomless sea of intrigue, advising her not to marry into the imperial family and get caught up in the deadly battles of the harem. But she had insisted on entering the palace, even going so far as to actively curry favor with the crown prince. As her mother, I had respected her choice, hoping nothing but happiness for her. Now, I only hoped that she could respect mine. Lihua, I have thought of nothing but you for 20 years, now. It is finally time for me to think of myself. Displeasure clouded Xiao Lihua's face. No wonder father preferred to stay at the border with Aunt Mu all these years instead of coming home to you. I wish she were my mother instead. With that, she dabbed at her reddened eyes with a handkerchief and turned on her heel, storming away. I stared after her retreating figure, my gaze lingering for a long, long time. Perhaps I had accumulated too much disappointment over the years, for in that moment, my heart was as calm and still as a placid lake. It's all right, Lihua, soon enough, she will be your mother. After Xiao Lihua left, I went back to weaving the unfinished tiger head shoes for my youngest grandson. The empty Osmanthus courtyard felt cold and desolate in the winter chill. Even with more charcoal braziers warming the room, the cold seemed to seep into my bones, impossible to chase away. Xiao Lihua had returned to her maiden home in such great pomp and circumstance, only to storm back to the palace without even staying for a single meal. Xiao Chu flew into a rage. Blaming me for everything, he accused me of not personally cooking a nice meal for our daughter. You can throw tantrums with me all you want at your age, but our daughter rarely comes home. How could you deliberately ruin her mood like this? I found his words utterly laughable. Not bothering to waste a single more word on him. It won't happen again. There was no need for a future between him and me, or any of them, for that matter. My meek and compliant tone took the wind out of Xiao Chu's sails, his anger fizzling out in an instant. He glanced around the room, finally noticing something was amiss. Why is the room so empty? It looks so lifeless. I stuck my embroidery needle into the tiger head shoe and bit off the thread cleanly. I threw away some useless things. I've had them around for 30 years. I grew tired of looking at them. Just like I grew tired of looking at you, Xiao Chu. Xiao Chu couldn't help but chide me. You should be more thrifty, not so wasteful. Save some blessings and wealth for our grandchildren to enjoy. A flicker of stiffness crossed Xiao Chu's face. He seemed to catch the hidden meaning behind my words, his expression growing somewhat uneasy. What nonsense are you talking about? Tomorrow morning, I'll take you to East Street to pick out coffins. We'll be buried together when our time comes. He paused for a moment, a hint of guilt flickering in his cloudy eyes. It will be a 3-person coffin, though. Yunjin will be buried with us too. Who wants to be buried with either of you? I frowned, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Make it a 2-person coffin. My retort made Xiao Chu assume I was refusing to let him be buried with Mu Yunjin. Yunjin stayed with me at the border for all those years, taking your place. She even bore me so many children. She has worked hard and suffered so much. Can't you grant her this one small wish? If my heart hadn't already turned to stone long ago, his words would have infuriated me to no end. Either a 2-person coffin, or we each go our separate ways in death. I had no desire to explain myself further, issuing him a direct order to leave. Stubborn old woman. Xiao Chu's expression darkened abruptly. He slammed his sleeve down in anger and stormed out. That night, an unexpected guest arrived at Osmanthus courtyard. Mu Yunjin showed up uninvited, sitting down with a smile on her face. Her every gesture exuded the dignified grace that comes with age and experience, but the wrinkles creeping around her eyes were impossible to hide. She was actually older than me, but I had never imagined she would look so worn out and aged. Then again, she had endured years of wind and sun at the border, not to mention the toll of bearing so many children, draining her vitality day by day. Naturally, she could never hope to look as radiant and energetic as I did. Mu Yunjin looked at me, cutting straight to the chase. For these past 30 years, you and a Chu have lived apart more than you've been together, hardly much of a real marriage. But I'm different. We've lived like an ordinary married couple, side by side every day, raising our children together. Everyone in the military camp calls me Madam. You might not know this, but over 30 years ago, a Chu and I were deeply in love, but the Xiao family refused to let him marry me as his wife. In the end, It was me who persuaded him to accept the marriage alliance with the Luo family and marry you. I took a slow, calm sip of my ginseng tea, lifting my eyes to meet hers. So after spending half your life waiting at the border, going from being his secret mistress to his acknowledged partner, you traveled all the way to the capital with Xiao Chu just to tell me your touching love story. The smile froze on Mu Yunjin's lips, a flicker of unease crossing her weathered face. It took her a long while to find her voice again. Chu regrets that I never got to marry into the Xiao mansion. That's why he specially arranged for your son to marry my niece Mu Jini. It was his way of mending my broken heart. Luo Chishu, the title of general's wife is one I willingly gave up to you. Your son's marriage was also arranged thanks to me. I only want to be buried with a Chu under the name of Xiao Mu when I die. Can't you even grant me this tiny wish? I froze in place. No wonder no matter how kind I was to my daughter-in-law Mu Jini all these years, she had always disliked me. It turned out she was related to Mu Yunjin by blood. I looked at the undisguised provocation flickering in Mu Yunjin's eyes, my expression remaining as calm and impassive as ever. To be Xiao Chu's hidden mistress, you gave up your own name and identity. You even endured 30 long years without ever returning to the Mu family. Mu Yunjin, was it all worth it? The smile never left Mu Yunjin's face, but her calloused hands tightened their grip on the wide sleeves of her robe. She had no answer to give me. I glanced at Mu Yunjin's aged appearance, a sudden wave of pity washing over me. She was the same age as Xiao Chu, yet she looked so haggard and faded, her eyes even taking on a dull, grayish hue. I sighed, looking away from her. I don't want this marriage or this coffin anymore. Take them if you want them so badly. Mu Yunjin's face flushed bright red with anger in an instant. I don't need your charity. These things were mine to begin with. She stood up abruptly, her face set in a rigid frown, and fled the courtyard in a flustered and embarrassed hurry. After Mu Yunjin left, I began giving orders to my nanny in an orderly fashion, telling her to purchase the old Luo family mansion back in Zhenju. I also hired servants to clean and tidy the courtyard, preparing it for my remaining years of peaceful retirement. From the days of my black hair to my now white strands, I had spent my entire life running the affairs of the general's mansion. Now, it was finally time for me to think of myself, to live out my golden years in peace and comfort. Xiao Chu took Mu Yunjin out of the mansion, heading to East Street in great style to pick out their coffins. With them gone, I finally had the freedom to go to the storeroom and take stock of the family's assets. The cold winter wind howled through the window panes, but I sat calmly in my chair, flipping through the account books page by page. I was going to take back every single cent of my dowry, every last item that belonged to me. I wanted nothing else from this family, not a single thing. I didn't want my son or daughter either. I had raised them into adults, seen them marry and start families of their own. Even Xiao Chu had found himself a new life. But what none of them knew was this. To this day, every single expense of the general's mansion had been covered by my dowry money. The real reason the Xiao family had refused to let Xiao Chu marry Mu Yunjin all those years ago was that the general's mansion had already been on the brink of bankruptcy. They had needed my substantial family fortune to fill the huge financial void. Now that I was leaving the Xiao family, taking back what was rightfully mine was only fair and just. Watching my servants carry box after box of my dowry out of the storeroom, the steward was beside himself with anxiety. He wanted to stop them, but dared not lift a finger. Old mistress, if you take all these things away, what will become of the general's mansion? My expression was cold and icy. Go ask your new mistress to figure it out. Let her find a way to support this family. The steward looked utterly desperate. Old mistress, a day of marriage means 100 days of grace. Surely you can't abandon the master like this. I let out a cold laugh. Xiao Chu and Mu Yunjin had 100 days of grace 1,000 times over, far more than he and I ever shared. I slammed the imperial edict stamped with the word divorce onto the steward's hands. I supported 135 members of this general's mansion for 30 long years. Now you expect me to support Mu Yunjin and her entire brood as well? What a pipe dream. Go back and tell your precious general that His Majesty has granted me permission to repudiate him. I don't want him anymore. With that, I turned on my heel and strode away without a single backward glance. When I returned to Osmanthus courtyard, I looked around the room I had lived in for 30 years, telling my nanny to pack up everything that belonged to me. People always said that when you grow old, you must have someone by your side, but right now, all I wanted was to go back to my hometown, to the place where I had been born and raised. Half a lifetime had passed in the blink of an eye. In the end, the only place that could bring me true peace and stability was the land of my birth. After packing up everything I planned to take with me, I personally carried a bucket of oil, pouring it around the courtyard in a slow, deliberate circle. Then I tossed a single fire starter into the pool of oil. A tiny flicker of flame burst into a raging inferno in an instant, the bright firelight illuminating the sky above the general's mansion. My nanny froze for a moment, but she did not try to stop me. Bathed in the glow of the towering flames, I turned and walked away. If I was going to leave, I was going to leave cleanly and completely. Even the spider webs in the corners of the courtyard would not be spared. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, from now on. Osmanthus courtyard in the general's mansion would bear no trace of my existence, and the Xiao family would have nothing more to do with me ever again. Black smoke billowed into the sky, the firelight and dust dancing together, refracting the faint starlight above, and I, finally, was free from the prison that had trapped me for 30 long years. East Street, at the coffin shop, Xiao Chu kept urging the shopkeeper to custom make a 3-person coffin. But Mu Yunjin's eyes were fixed on a ready-made 2-person coffin, her face filled with obvious affection. He felt a surge of irritation and impatience. Even if Luo Chishu had grumbled about not wanting a 3-person coffin, she was just an old woman. What could she possibly do about it? He was the master of this household. When he spoke, it was a decision, not a negotiation. He had thought Mu Yunjin would be more understanding, that she would know what he truly wanted. He never expected her to be so stubborn and unyielding too. Looking at coffins so early in the new year is bad luck. Let's go back, he snapped. Xiao Chu did not wait for the woman behind him, striding onto the carriage in his usual decisive manner. But when the carriage finally reached the gate of the general's mansion, he saw the steward running out in a blind panic, tripping and falling flat on his face as he crossed the threshold. Master, it's a disaster. Osmanthus courtyard is on fire. Xiao Chu's face paled with shock. He jumped down from the carriage in an instant. Where is the mistress? The steward handed the imperial edict to Xiao Chu with trembling hands, his face ashen with despair. The mistress took all the silver from the storeroom. She only left this edict of repudiation for you. And then she left the city. Clang! The hand warmer in Xiao Chu's hand slipped from his grasp, crashing to the ground with a loud bang. He unfolded the imperial edict, his eyes widening in disbelief as he read the shocking words written on it. This can't be. But the bright imperial jade seal stamped in the bottom left corner was unmistakably real, undeniable proof of its authenticity. That woman, she had started out wanting a divorce, but in the end, she had repudiated him. The steward rambled on in a state of utter panic beside him. The fire in Osmanthus courtyard has been put out, but everything is gone, completely burned to the ground. And there's no money left in the storeroom to rebuild it. Master, what will become of the general's mansion now? The steward's desperate pleas fell on deaf ears. Xiao Chu stood frozen in place, his mind a complete blank. Mu Yunjin stepped forward from the side, assuming the dignified air of the new mistress of the household. Your master and I brought some silver back with us from the border. Send someone to use it to repair the courtyard properly and calm everyone's nerves. Seeing that Xiao Chu was still too stunned to speak, the The steward had no choice but to follow Mu Yunjin's orders for the time being, hurrying off to carry them out. Meanwhile, Luo Chishu sat comfortably in her carriage, traveling steadily toward Zhenju. There, a mansion awaited her, fully prepared for her retirement years. Ever since she had married Xiao Chu at the age of 15, she had been trapped in the capital city. In the beginning, when Xiao Chu had not yet left for the battlefield, she had not minded the confinement so much. Back then, when he was home at the mansion, he would often spar with her, practicing swordsmanship moves together. A family of military generals naturally admired those skilled in martial arts. Madame Xiao treated her with great kindness. Unlike the arrogant noble ladies of the capital, she was gentle and courteous to her. Later, she finally learned the truth. The general's mansion was strapped for cash. Xiao Chu's father had died in battle fighting for the country. His elder brothers had all perished on the battlefield, leaving behind only a group of widows, children, and the young Xiao Chu. The already cash-strapped general's mansion was thus dealt a double blow. Her arrival had solved their urgent financial crisis. After the carriage had traveled some distance, the driver stopped to feed the horses. Luo Chishu stepped outside to admire the lush green foxtail grass by the roadside. Nanny Wang teased her with a smile. When you sat high up as the respected mistress of the mansion, you were always glum and dejected. Now that you're out and about, you even find joy in the wild weeds by the road. Luo Chishu lifted her eyes to look at her, smiling softly. It wasn't just the wild weeds she delighted in, she cherished even the wild, unbridled wind. With that thought, she grabbed a guard's horse, swung herself up onto the saddle nimbly. Her smooth, agile movements made Nanny Wang's eyes jump with alarm. Nanny Wang hurried forward, panic lacing her voice. "My lady, you're at such an advanced age. If someone sees you like this," hearing the worry in her tone, Luo Chishu cut her off with a faint smile. "Don't worry about it." She had already divorced Xiao Chu at 45, a little more unorthodox, a little more undignified for her age. Wouldn't hurt a bit. Nanny Wang froze in place, watching along with the servants as their mistress raised her whip and galloped away at full speed. Though her hair was completely white, Luo Chishu sat tall and straight, her eyes bright and clear, her spirit vibrant and alive. Everyone in the capital praised her as the perfect wife, diligent, thrifty, and a masterful manager of the household. Only now did her followers realize that she had once been a free-spirited, unrestrained soul. Nanny Wang shook her head, truly unable to understand why the old general had never appreciated his own wife. Night fell. The group reached an inn to rest for the night. Luo Chishu sat by the window, sipping tea and listening to the chatter of passers-by outside. Someone was saying, "The peonies in the West Street garden are in full bloom. They look absolutely stunning." The next moment, a man dressed in an elegant white silk robe stepped in front of Luo Chishu's carriage, holding a bouquet of pink jasmine flowers. "I went to the temple yesterday to get my fortune told," he said earnestly. "The fortune teller said that today I would meet the person I would grow old with at West Street. Now that I've laid eyes on you, I finally understand what destiny truly means." Luo Chishu froze in surprise. Nanny Wang frowned deeply, stepping forward to block Luo Chishu with her body. "Where did this rogue come from? Guards, seize him and take him to the local officials at once." At the sound of her words, the man's face paled with fright. He turned and fled in a hurry. Luo Chishu wore a strange expression. Had the world changed so much these days? It was all so unfamiliar to an old woman like her. She could understand why the emperor, out of their childhood friendship, wanted to take her, a married minister's wife, into his palace. But to be accosted by admirers even on the road, Luo Chishu sighed. Climbing back into the carriage and taking out her tinted glasses to read a book. In these times, nothing was more valuable than education. Even bamboo paper had skyrocketed in price over the past 30 years, from 20 copper coins a sheet to 100. But as the carriage continued on its way, Luo Chishu never expected that someone from the Xiao mansion would come chasing after her. "Old mistress," a servant called out. Hurrying over, the old general sent someone to deliver this letter. Luo Chishu guessed it must be a letter scolding her for throwing a tantrum, burning down the courtyard, and leaving without a word. She told Nanny Wang to take the letter, then ordered the Xiao mansion servants to leave with a cold expression. "Leave them behind. Don't let those people follow us." As soon as they arrived at the Luo family mansion in Zhenju, Luo Chishu saw the steward and the servants waiting respectfully at the gate. The steward wore a broad smile on his face. "My lady, someone has sent you a grand gift, waiting for you in the courtyard." Soft snowflakes drifted down from the sky, settling on the peach trees in the peach blossom courtyard that had not yet bloomed, rustling gently in the breeze. Luo Chishu went to find the grand gift the steward had spoken of, when she saw the small palm-sized box. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Who sent this? Her question hung in the air, but she found the answer the moment she opened the box. Inside were deeds to numerous shops, sealed with bright red official stamps, proof of their status as imperial merchants. Nanny Wang hesitated for a moment before asking, "My lady, should we accept this?" Luo Chishu wasn't sure what the emperor's intentions were, but she saw no reason to refuse free money. She nodded calmly. "Keep it." The servants exchanged glances with each other, looking stunned. Luo Chishu's voice rang out again. "Where is the letter Xiao Chu sent?" Nanny Wang composed herself, replying, "It's with this old servant, my lady." Besides this letter, the old general also sent someone with a message later. She thought the message was nothing but nonsense, not worth repeating to her lady, and she hadn't gotten the chance to do so anyway. Luo Chishu waved her hand dismissively. "Speak your mind, it's fine." A look of disgust flashed across Nanny Wang's eyes as she relayed the message. The old general said that if you don't return to the capital within 3 days, he will officially recognize Mu Yunjin as his legal wife. Several of the newly hired maids were quick-witted. One of them, dressed in purple, stepped forward with a suggestion. "My lady, should we teach that Mu Yunjin a lesson? Your servants know some girls from the local brothels. They're absolutely enchanting. They'll have the old general wrapped around their little fingers in no time, making Mu Yunjin taste the agony of living like a widow." Luo Chishu took a sip of her wolfberry tea, laughing softly. "I appreciate your loyalty to me, but Mu Yunjin doesn't deserve such a fate. If anything, she's rather a pitiful woman. As a fellow woman, why would she make things harder for another old woman who was even older than herself?" Collecting her thoughts, Luo Chishu opened Xiao Chu's letter with a calm expression. His familiar handwriting leaped off the page. "If you return now, this general will forgive you for everything." Luo Chishu twitched the corner of her mouth, then tossed the letter into the stove without a moment's hesitation. Flames flared up instantly, consuming the paper. A wisp of black smoke curled upward, obscuring the indifference in her eyes. She was divorced now, but life still had to go on. No one dared to trouble Luo Chishu's shops in Zhenju. Moreover, after managing the vast Xiao family estate for so many years, she had accumulated extensive connections and experience. Running a mere dozen shops in Zhenju was child's play for her. The young maids gathered around her every day, showering her with compliments. "My lady has such discerning taste. Not only have you made the businesses thrive, but you even have the time to share your expertise with other shopkeepers. We truly admire you." Luo Chishu smiled, unable to resist asking, "You girls are all so sweet with your words. Unlike me." Her voice trailed off, unspoken. After spending so much time together, everyone knew a little about her past. They all understood exactly who she was referring to, the Xiao family. The maids all shook their heads, indignant on her behalf. A pang of sadness tugged at Luo Chishu's heart. That family had relied entirely on her for support. Yet they had accused her of being nothing but a miser. complaining that she was too nagging and meddlesome, nothing like the understanding and considerate Mu Yunjin. She didn't want to dwell on those painful memories. She waved her hand. Let's call it a day with the shop inspections. With that, she turned to leave the silk shop, but a young servant boy, dressed in livery, came hurrying over to block her path. Old mistress, the old general sent another letter. He specifically ordered me to make sure you read it personally. The smile faded from Luo Chishu's face, her expression turning cold. She stared at the servant boy silently. Under the intensity of her sharp gaze, he hung his head even lower, shrinking back nervously. Very well, she said flatly. Luo Chishu was a magnanimous woman. She saw no point in arguing with a mere servant. She took the letter and opened it right there and then. The words on the page made her blood boil. You re just an old woman. Who else would want you now that you've left me? Luo Chishu's fingers tightened around the paper, crumpling it into a ball. Then, slowly, she smoothed it out again. She turned and walked to the counter of the silk shop. Picking up a writing brush, she was utterly speechless, seething with anger. She wanted to write a scathing reply, but for a moment, she couldn't find the words. One of the quick-witted maids stepped forward boldly. My lady, let me do it. Luo Chishu blinked in surprise. You, very well, go ahead. The maid, Zixia, took the brush from her hand and wrote furiously on the paper. Your hair is as white as the maggots crawling on your father's corpse. That thing between your legs is as thin as a needle and as short as a thumb when it's hard. How on earth do you still have the audacity to be so arrogant? Luo Chishu and all the servants leaned in to read the words, stunned into silence, after handing the crumpled letter back to the ashen-faced servant boy. Luo Chishu walked slowly back to the peach blossom courtyard, her posture leisurely and unhurried. She could tell from the letter that Xiao Chu was furious. He had always had an overinflated sense of pride in his eyes. Anyone who dared to humiliate him, especially by taking their grievances all the way to the emperor, would earn his undying hatred. But Luo Chishu couldn't understand why he was so angry. Her leaving should have been exactly what he wanted. Now he could marry Mu Yunjin properly. And in a year or two, he could be buried with her openly and legitimately. A flicker of melancholy crossed Luo Chishu's eyes at the thought. Her children were unfilial. Her husband had never loved her. When she died, who would take care of her funeral arrangements? Before she knew it, she had spoken her thoughts aloud. Nanny Wang, walking beside her, said softly, My lady could ask His Majesty to handle it for you. Luo Chishu neither agreed nor disagreed. She simply sighed. Nanny Wang, I haven't visited my mother's grave in a long time. Tomorrow, let's go pay our respects to her. As for her own funeral arrangements, she was still in good health. With a strong body, there was no need to rush things like Xiao Chu and Mu Yunjin had. Nanny Wang nodded respectfully. Yes, my lady. Following quietly behind her as they returned to the mansion, back in her courtyard, Luo Chishu took a simple bath, then retired to her bedroom to rest, to make herself feel more at home. She had specially had the courtyard renovated to look exactly as it had 30 years ago, but that night, she tossed and turned restlessly in bed, unable to fall asleep. When she finally drifted off into a fitful slumber, she was plagued by a jumble of bizarre, vivid dreams, dreams of her childhood, laughing and playing with Yi Hanqing, dreams of her wedding night at 15, the red curtains billowing around her and Xiao Chu, dreams of standing atop the city walls at 30. Watching Xiao Chu ride away to war again, her heart filled with bitter longing, fragments of memories flashed before her eyes. One after another, finally, the dreams froze on a single scene. Xiao Chu, surrounded by Mu Yunjin and their large family, looking at her with such deep, tender affection. That gaze pierced Luo Chishu's heart like a knife. Jolting her awake with a start, she rubbed her throbbing temples, making up her mind to move out of the peach blossom courtyard first. Then have the entire courtyard renovated once again. But before she did that, she would go visit her mother's grave. It was still the first lunar month, and the winter snow had not yet melted. On the western outskirts of Jeonju, a large tomb stood beneath an ancient peach tree. The stone tablet was inscribed with the words, "Tomb of Madame Luo." Luo Chishu knelt down slowly, her expression neither lonely nor sad. She tidied the incense sticks in the burner, arranging them neatly. Before breaking into a faint smile, she looked up at the tombstone, her voice soft and steady. "Mother, I've separated from Xiao Chu. He was never the right man for me, but I wasted 30 years of my life on him, and now I'm already an old woman with gray hair. When I join you in the underworld someday, please don't laugh at me." The wind blew, swaying the flower branches for a moment, yet not a single peach blossom fell. The air carried only the crisp, clean scent of snow. A large part of the reason Luo Chishu had chosen to return to her ancestral home in Jeonju after the divorce was because of her mother. She had accompanied her mother back to her maternal grandparents' house twice, once when she was 5 years old, and once when she was 10. At 5, the moment her mother stepped into the house, she had collapsed onto a coffin, sobbing silently. Back then, Luo Chishu had been too young to even tell if the deceased was her grandfather or grandmother. She could only gnaw on her own fingers, watching helplessly. It was not until she turned 10 that Luo Chishu began to vaguely understand what home meant to a married woman. Her mother had stroked her head, her eyes red-rimmed with tears. "Your father and I had a fight. He has taken a mistress outside. I can't swallow this anger. Will you come back to your grandparents' home with me? You are all I have left in this world." So Luo Chishu had remembered, when you quarrel with your husband, you go back to your maiden home. When you can't suppress your grievances, you go back to your maiden home. A woman's maiden home would always be her greatest source of strength and backing. But Xiao Chu had been so far away at the border, she hadn't even gotten the chance to quarrel with him. 30 years. 30 long years had worn away all of Luo Chishu's youthful impulsiveness and fire. Even when she had discovered his mistress, she had only responded with silence. She had loved him once. She had hated him once too, but all those feelings for him had faded away with the arrival of winter. Just like the fragrance of peach blossoms dissipating into the wind, Luo Chishu had no idea what Xiao Chu was thinking. She could never hope to fathom the mind of a man who had only returned home 10 times in 30 years. In the span of a single month, Luo Chishu's life in Jeonju had flourished. Besides managing her shops, she spent her free time going to the opera house to listen to plays, thoroughly enjoying her newfound freedom. Strangely enough, Xiao Chu had not flown into a rage over that scathing letter she had sent. Everything had gone quiet, almost as if he was imposing a one-sided Cold War on her. It was not until she received a letter from her friend in the capital that Luo Chishu finally learned the truth. Xiao Chu had gone to the palace several times, begging the emperor for an imperial edict to arrest her, on the grounds that she had embezzled the general's mansion's property. The emperor had thoroughly reprimanded him, calling him a freeloader who lived off his wife's wealth, but word of just how humiliating the scolding had not spread outside the palace walls. At the same time, the managers of her various shops had come to her with joyous news. "Our sales revenue last month has doubled compared to previous years." Looking at the tally of 32,700 taels of silver in the account books, Luo Chishu broke into a wide, genuine smile. With a single wave of her hand, she rewarded every single employee with a full month's salary as a bonus. On the other side of the country, in the capital, after being thoroughly dressed down by the emperor, Xiao Chu had finally calmed down. He paced restlessly through the general's mansion, snapping irritably at a servant. "Has the old mistress still not returned?" The servant shook his head tremblingly in fear. That shake of the head, combined with the memory of the emperor's scathing reprimand, suddenly brought back the image of that insulting letter and the edict of repudiation. They felt like an invisible slap landing hard across his face, reigniting the searing anger in his heart all over again. But just as quickly, His rage fizzled out. The fact that he had still received that venomous letter from her meant that she hadn't completely shut him out of her life. For some inexplicable reason, that thought brought Xiao Chu a measure of relief. But he had barely taken 2 steps when he collided with the steward, who wore a grave and anxious expression. "General, we do not have enough money to pay the workers for repairing Osmanthus courtyard." Xiao Chu froze, staring at him in disbelief. "What? It's just a small courtyard that was burned down. How much money could it possibly cost? How could my vast general's mansion be so poor that it can't even afford this?" Was the general's mansion really this destitute? He remembered the emperor calling him a freeloader again. The looks of disdain the ministers had shot him during that audience were still fresh in his mind. Xiao Chu had spent decades in the military camp. He had heard every kind of insult under the sun, but for the first time in his life, he had found himself making a clumsy attempt to defend himself in front of all the civil officials. "I have lived off my own military salary for 30 years at the border," he had declared, as soon as the words left his mouth. The silver-tongued civil officials had immediately pounced on him, mocking him relentlessly. "Almost forgot our esteemed old general has established quite the cozy family at the border, hasn't he? Of course, one man's salary alone is hardly enough to support 2 entire families." Xiao Chu had been seething with frustration, yet he had been forced to swallow the bitter humiliation in silence. After the court session had ended, he had turned to his good friend, growling angrily. "A bunch of useless pen-pushers. What do they know about true love? Yunjin and I share a love that transcends all." His friend had frowned at him, looking like he wanted to say something, but ultimately holding his tongue. Xiao Chu's voice had turned cold, heavy with exhaustion and weariness. "If it weren't for Luo Chishu, I would have married the woman I loved 30 years ago. Now we've been reduced to nothing but resentful spouses. It should have been me who repudiated her, not the other way around." His friend could no longer hold back, finally speaking his mind bluntly. "You have absolutely no conscience. That woman took care of your entire Xiao family for 30 long years. She sacrificed so much in her youth, raising your 2 children all by herself, with no help from you." Pulling himself back from his bitter memories, Xiao Chu stared in the direction of Osmanthus courtyard. The memories associated with Luo Chishu came flooding back to him like a revolving lantern, one after another. 30 years of marriage, Luo Chishu had guarded and maintained the vast Xiao family estate all by herself. The year she had been pregnant with their child, his family had pressured him to follow in his father's footsteps and serve in the military. He had left the capital to go to the border, to gallop across the battlefield. When he had first joined the army, he had started as a lowly foot soldier. Luo Chishu, filled with longing and worry for him, had sent him large sums of money, even going out of her way to pull strings and make connections to ensure his safety and comfort. Yet she had never once complained to him about any of it. She had just gone about her days, busy and bustling about with her large pregnant belly, writing to him faithfully, "Your child and I are waiting for you to come home." But now that he had finally returned home, all he had received from her was an edict of repudiation. Xiao Chu unfolded the edict once again, staring at the words written on it. They seemed to burn his eyes, glaring at him mockingly. He could no longer sit still. He jumped to his feet, grabbing his sword and saber, ready to hack the unbreakable imperial edict to pieces in his rage. But after searching his room from top to bottom, Xiao Chu could not find his favorite sword, the legendary Moi sword. Where had he put it? Xiao Chu frowned, racking his brain, when a sudden realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. That sword had been a gift from Luo Chishu. Could it be that, like all the other furnishings in Osmanthus courtyard, she had taken it and sold it off? At the thought, his heart sank like a stone, plummeting into the pitch-black depths of a cliff, refusing to give up. Xiao Chu searched his room for the entire afternoon. When he still found nothing, a hollow, empty feeling began to spread in his chest, weighing heavily on his heart like a boulder. A stubborn thought suddenly took hold of him, unshakable. He would not rest until he found that sword. Xiao Chu sent for the steward, demanding sharply, "Has the old mistress taken my moi sword with her when she left?" The steward shook his head firmly. When the old mistress left, she did not take a single thing from Bamboo Courtyard with her. Xiao Chu's brows furrowed deeply. Then it must still be in the courtyard somewhere. He just hadn't been able to find it yet. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, a wave of powerlessness washed over him. These were the belongings of his own courtyard, yet he had no idea where they were kept. If word of this got out, he would be the laughingstock of the entire capital. Xiao Chu went to ask his son Xiao Fengye, but the young man also shook his head in confusion. "Is it really that important? Father, if you want, I can help you look for it." So Xiao Fengye joined the search as well, but even after turning Bamboo Courtyard upside down, they still found no trace of the sword. Xiao Chu could not put into words the strange, tangled mix of emotions swirling in his chest. Almost as if possessed, he found his feet carrying him toward the empty, desolate Osmanthus courtyard. The ground was covered with black ash and cinders left behind by the fire. Charred beams and timbers lay scattered all over the ground. With every step he took, dirty ash clung to the hem of his robe, making him want to brush it off repeatedly. Xiao Chu stood there in silence, staring at the ruins for a long time, before finally walking slowly over to the dry well and peering down into its depths. He squinted his eyes. There seemed to be clumps of something down there, but he couldn't make out what they were. Xiao Chu hesitated for a moment, then slowly and deliberately took off his outer robe, grabbed hold of the well rope, and lowered himself down into the well. When he finally hauled the clumps of things up to the surface, he stared at them in stunned silence before realizing they were packages upon packages of medicinal ointments. He let out a bark of bitter, angry laughter, hurling the packages violently to the ground. At that exact moment, the old injury in his wrist flared up again, sending a sharp, searing pain shooting through his arm. His face turned deathly pale in an instant. He couldn't help but clutch his wrist tightly, gritting his teeth against the pain. Even though the medicinal ointments he needed were right there on the ground, he stubbornly refused to use them, as if his pride was more valuable than his own body. In the days that followed, Xiao Chu never mentioned Luo Chishu's name in the mansion ever again, but even though he refused to admit it to himself, he knew deep down that he was secretly hoping she would come crying back to him, begging for his forgiveness. On the other side of the country, in Jinju, Luo Chishu was wandering around her porcelain shop, when the shop manager led her to the porcelain kiln, letting her watch the entire process of firing the imperial yellow porcelain with her own eyes. She even made a porcelain vase herself. She had seen this exact style of yellow porcelain at a royal banquet in the palace years ago, and had been instantly captivated by its beauty. She had wanted nothing more than to make one together with Xiao Chu. When she had mentioned it to him back then, he had simply brushed her off, saying he had no time for such trivial things. The other noble ladies had looked at her with smirks and knowing glances. Even the virtuous consort of the palace had laughed and teased her. "It's just a piece of porcelain. After all, Luo Chishu, General Xiao Chu's hands are meant for wielding swords, not for molding clay." Luo Chishu had merely smiled faintly in response. It had been nothing more than a passing fancy of hers back then. Xiao Chu had rarely returned home, so of course he had never had the time for such frivolous pastimes. She had never imagined that now, all these years later, she would finally get to fulfill that small wish of hers. She could make as many pieces of porcelain as she wanted now, as long as she took that first step. The path ahead of her seemed to stretch out infinitely, wide and smooth. When she returned to her courtyard in the afternoon, Luo Chishu was surprised to find an unexpected guest waiting for her. The moment she laid eyes on Xiao Chu, she noticed how haggard and worn out he looked. He was only 50 years old, still a strong, robust man for a general of his stature. So why did he look so sallow and gaunt, like a shadow of his former self? Their eyes met, and in that single moment, it felt as if another half a lifetime had passed between them. It was Luo Chishu who broke the silence first, her voice calm and steady. "General Xiao, what brings you here?" Xiao Chu's voice was hoarse and rough. "Qi, where did you put the sword you bought me a few years ago? Which part of the general's mansion is it in?" Luo Chishu blinked in surprise. Which sword? Over the past 30 years, she had bought many precious swords as gifts for Xiao Chu. She had admired him, the way he had defended their country, the heroic, valiant figure he cut on the battlefield. She had hoped that he would wield the swords she gave him to cut down the enemy's heads, but more than anything, she had hoped that he would return home safely to her, so they could watch the sunset together in their old age. Their hair turned white with time. She had never thought that at the age of 50, she would no longer be able to walk this path by his side. After a long pause, Xiao Chu finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Moi sword." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting away, refusing to meet her gaze. "Can you come back to the general's mansion with me to help me find it? As for that letter you wrote, insulting me, I'll let it slide. I won't hold it against you." Luo Chishu replied indifferently. "It's on the top shelf of the wardrobe in the third wing room of your bamboo courtyard." Xiao Chu clearly hadn't expected her to remember the exact location so clearly. He stared at her, a complex look in his eyes. She had always been the one to take care of his courtyard, hadn't she? To remember the exact location of so many things, it was clear just how much thought and care she had put into looking after his home all these years. "Thank you," he said quietly. Luo Chishu nodded faintly in acknowledgement, then asked, "Is there anything else?" The air between them seemed to freeze solid. Even Xiao Chu's heart felt heavy and suffocated, weighed down by an inexplicable emotion. Logically, now that the matter of the sword had been settled, he should have turned around and left, but for some reason, he didn't want to go back just yet. He fumbled for an excuse. "I still have so many things missing, they're all very important. Why don't you come back with me and help me sort them out?" Luo Chishu fell silent for a moment. She saw right through his flimsy pretext. He just wanted her to return to the capital. A flash of coldness flickered across her eyes. "Find them yourself. Am I your servant?" Her icy indifference drained the color from Xiao Chu's face. A flicker of resentment stirred in his heart. 30 years of marriage, husband and wife through thick and thin, was it really too much to ask for her to help him find a few things? Servant, indeed. Since when did helping find things make someone a servant? Was she really being this petty? Sure enough, she was still the same arrogant, prideful Luo Chishu she'd always been. Seeing that Xiao Chu had nothing more to say, Luo Chishu twitched the corner of her mouth. "Don't come looking for me again. Tell your steward to tidy up the house. If he still can't find things, he can ask him." That was the last of her patience for him. Xiao Chu took a sharp breath, closed his eyes tightly, then opened them again, his voice laced with thinly veiled threat. "If you don't return to the capital within 7 days, I'll officially make Mu Yunjin my main wife." With that, he turned on his heel and strode away without looking back. Luo Chishu listened to those familiar words, a strange look crossing her face. At that moment, Nanny Wang stepped out from behind her, muttering under her breath, "Has the old general lost his mind? He said the same thing before. If you didn't come back within 3 days, he'd make Mu Yunjin his main wife. But here we are, and he still hasn't done it. Could it be, he actually wants you to go back?" Luo Chishu's voice was flat and emotionless. "He does want me to go back." Nanny Wang gaped in shock. Has the old general suddenly changed his ways? Or has he finally reached an age where he's going senile? Luo Chishu let out a dry laugh. He's perfectly lucid. The fact that he loves Mu Yunjin is one thing. If the general's mansion still had money, he would have made her his main wife without a second thought. But the problem is, the general's mansion has no money left. That's why he's kept my position open for me, dragging his feet on making Mu Yunjin the mistress of the house. All the hustle and bustle under heaven is for profit. All the coming and going under heaven is for profit. 7 days passed, and Luo Chishu still heard no news of Xiao Chu making Mu Yunjin his main wife. Instead, he had handed over the power to manage the mansion to her. For a time, they lived in a fragile peace. Xiao Chu often took Mu Yunjin to banquets and gatherings all over the capital. Xiao Fengye and Mu Jini doted on Mu Yunjin endlessly. Even her youngest grandson took a liking to Mu Yunjin's gentle demeanor, calling her grandmother affectionately. But this idyllic peace did not last long. Mu Yunjin had spent her entire life at the border. She had no idea how to run a noble household. To make matters worse, her eyesight was failing her. She could barely read the account books without squinting. Before long, the entire general's mansion descended into chaos. Meanwhile, Xiao Chu did nothing but drink and practice martial arts with his old friends every day. When he returned home, he would grumble non-stop about how the meals weren't as good as before, how there were far fewer servants than there used to be. Before, we had 10 dishes per meal, now we only get 5. Before, we had 5 meat dishes every meal, now we only have 2. All the dishes are laid out on the table. And we can't even decide which of the 2 meat dishes to fight over. Mu Yunjin took a deep breath, forcing down the urge to snap at him. Her voice was laced with exhaustion. The storeroom is empty. We can't afford to squander what little we have left. Naturally, Xiao Chu was displeased. In the end, he chose to go out again, looking for his old friends to mooch meals off of. His departure left Mu Yunjin sitting in silence for a moment. Then she forced a smile to her lips. Let's continue eating, everyone. Mu Jini scooped a spoonful of chicken soup, sniffing the familiar taste she'd been eating for a month straight. She finally couldn't hold back the frustration bubbling up inside her. Can't we have a different soup for once? I'm so sick of this. I could throw up. And another thing, we used to have bird's nest soup every single day. Now it's gone completely. What on earth is the cook doing? Her words hung heavy in the air. No one dared to make a sound. This wasn't a complaint about the cook, it was a pointed jab at Mu Yunjin. Mu Yunjin's face darkened, but she still managed to force a smile. The general's mansion has no money left. Why don't you take over managing the household? With that, she held out the keys to the storeroom and the account room to Mu Jini. Mu Jini's eyes lit up. She snatched the keys from her hand eagerly. Fine, I'll do it. At that very moment, Luo Chishu was sitting with Nanny Wang and the others, enjoying a table full of Junju's local delicacies, glutinous rice dumplings stuffed with meatballs, shrimp wontons, wine-steamed chicken, bamboo shoots with lamb trotters, 5-spice vinegar clams, pork bone clear soup, Chinese yam soup. Just as they were in the middle of their meal, a knock sounded at the courtyard gate. Luo Chishu paused mid-bite, casting a glance at Zixia, signaling her to go open the door. To her surprise, the visitor was none other than her precious son. What could he possibly want? Although confusion stirred in her heart, her expression remained completely calm and unchanged. Xiao Fengye strode over, mustering up his courage to speak. Mother, come back with me. You don't want father anymore, but you can't possibly abandon your own flesh and blood son, can you? Luo Chishu said nothing. Undeterred, Xiao Fengye pulled out the empty chair Zixia had just vacated and sat down, looking around at his surroundings with obvious interest. He'd heard that this house was her maternal family's property. It was no run-down old cottage, that was for sure. It was a grand mansion, with carved beams and painted pillars. The opulence of the furnishings was evident at a single glance. Xiao Fengye sighed in admiration. This peach blossom courtyard is even bigger than I imagined. It must cover at least 50 mu of land. Wouldn't you say, Mother? This place is so spacious, since you're unwilling to return to the bustling capital. We could humble ourselves and come live with you here instead. Luo Chishu was rendered momentarily speechless. Just as she was about to speak, Zixia beat her to it. Her willow-shaped eyebrows shot up in anger as she snapped at Xiao Fengye. What kind of nonsense is this? Young master, isn't your mother Mu Yunjin? Everyone silently praised her sharp tongue. Xiao Fengye frowned, glaring at Zixia disdainfully. Who are you, you insolent servant? You don't know the first thing about proper etiquette. He turned his gaze back to Luo Chishu. A servant like this should be sold off to a brothel immediately. At his words, Luo Chishu slammed her teacup down on the table with a sharp crack. Her voice was cold, laced with unmistakable displeasure. Xiao Fengye, she is my person. You have no right to meddle in what happens to her. And this is my courtyard. If you know what's good for you, you'll leave right now, otherwise I'll have my guards throw you out on your ear, and it will be your face that gets humiliated, not mine. Xiao Fengye looked thoroughly embarrassed. Mother, please don't be angry with me. I know I was wrong before. Just come back with me, please. If you don't come back soon, our family will fall apart completely. Luo Chishu raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Oh, she waved a hand, stopping her guards from stepping forward to knock him out. If Xiao Fengye was here to tell her about the general's mansion's misfortunes, well, she was all ears. It turned out that while the problem of managing the household had been solved, Mujini no longer had any time left to take care of their children. Although the children had nannies to look after them, they couldn't spend all their time playing with servants. Mujini was racked with worry over her children. So Xiao Fengye went to find Mu Yunjin, pleading with her, "Mother, please help us look after the children." He was convinced that a virtuous, kind woman like Mu Yunjin would raise intelligent, well-behaved children. Mu Yunjin had smiled warmly and agreed without hesitation. But reality wasted no time in slapping both of them hard across the face, one slap each. Mu Yunjin had only been looking after the children for less than a day when Luo Chishu's youngest grandson almost lost his life. It had happened at noon. While Mu Yunjin was taking her afternoon nap, the little boy had gotten into a fight with several of Mu Yunjin's own grandchildren. Children were full of boundless energy. When they fought, they never held back. Alone and outnumbered, the little boy was quickly set upon and ganged up on by the other children. Fortunately, the nannies had arrived just in time to pull the children apart. Mujini stared at her son, his face black and blue, blood trickling from his mouth, and burst into tears. She stormed into Mu Yunjin's room, yanking the elderly woman out of bed by her arm. "How could you be so careless with the children? What good are you, anyway?" Mu Yunjin hadn't expected anything like this to happen. Xiao Chu, who had rushed home in a hurry, walked in just in time to see this scene. Without a second thought, he pushed Mujini away roughly, his face filled with concern as he turned to Mu Yunjin. "Yunjin, are you all right?" That single push proved to be disastrous. Mujini stumbled backward, trying desperately to regain her balance, but she still crashed to the ground hard. Mu Yunjin shook her head, about to reach out to help Mujini up, but then she saw Mujini collapse to the floor, her face as white as a sheet, her body trembling violently. "What's wrong with you?" Everyone rushed over to her, only to find a large pool of blood spreading out beneath her. Mujini had miscarried that very night. She announced that she was stepping down from managing the household, telling them to find someone else to do it. The fact that she wasn't leaving the Xiao family entirely was already the height of her kindness. She said, Xiao Chu had considered letting Mu Yunjin's own children take over managing the household, but they had all grown up at the border. They had absolutely no experience dealing with the noble families of the capital. In the end, he sent Mujini a pile of expensive gifts as an apology, then told Xiao Fengye to go talk to her and try to persuade her to change her mind. "Father didn't mean to hurt you, it was just an accident. It will never happen again, I promise." But Mujini was filled with nothing but disappointment. Mu Yunjin had lived for half a century and still didn't know the first thing about running a household. Her father-in-law did nothing but complain all day long. The fact that she had been willing to take on the responsibility of managing the household at all had been more than generous. But now her unborn child was gone, all because of these trivial household squabbles. She couldn't help but resent the Xiao family deeply for what had happened. That very night, Mu Genie packed her bags and took her children back to her maternal family's home. Xiao Fengye was caught in the middle, torn between his wife and his family, at his wits' end. Finally, he went to find Mu Genie, begging her once again, "What do I have to say to make you come back with me?" Mu Genie's voice was cold as ice. "I'm not coming back with you, and I'm not managing the household anymore either. You can figure it out yourselves." Xiao Fengye frowned, frustration etched across his face. Mother managed the household like this for so many years. You know father didn't do it on purpose, he's just an old man. Why do you have to argue with him? If you don't know how to manage the household, then why can't you just learn? His words were like pouring gasoline on a raging fire. Mu Genie's voice rose several octaves in anger. Then go ask your mother to come back and do it. A flicker of impatience crossed Xiao Fengye's face. The general's mansion can't rely on mother to manage it forever. Eventually, it will fall to you to take over. Mu Genie let out a scoff of derision. At the end of the day, you're just too proud to swallow your pride and ask your mother to come back. But with how poor your general's mansion is now, even if you begged her to come back, she wouldn't. And honestly, I don't blame her one bit for not wanting to. Xiao Fengye thought she was being completely unreasonable. He scowled and stormed off in a huff. Boom! A clap of spring thunder split the night sky. In the third watch of the night, Xiao Fengye made his way to the Eastern Palace. He wanted to talk to Xiao Lihua, to ask her for money, but things didn't go as smoothly as he'd hoped. He was turned away at the gate, refused entry. Naturally, he wasn't willing to take no for an answer. He tried to force his way into the palace, but then a leaf blown from who knew where sailed through the air, hitting him square on the back of his hand. The force of it stopped him dead in his tracks, halting his attempt to push open the palace gates. Xiao Fengye stumbled backward a step, narrowly avoiding injury. Even so, he looked thoroughly disheveled and embarrassed. A familiar female voice drifted down to him from above. "Elder brother, I didn't really mean to hurt you. I just wanted you to know when to give up. Now that I'm married, how could I possibly take money from the Eastern Palace to fill the coffers of my maiden home?" Xiao Fengye tilted his head up to look at Xiao Lihua sitting on the roof eaves, the corners of his mouth twitching involuntarily. He finally understood why the crown prince didn't favor his own sister. After a moment's pause, he composed his features, speaking earnestly. "I came here to ask you for a loan, not to ask the Eastern Palace for money." Xiao Lihua cut him off sharply. "I wouldn't give even 100 taels to the general's mansion." "100 taels is just 100 taels," Xiao Fengye echoed absently, then belatedly registered what she'd said. "Are you even my sister?" He stared at her in disbelief, before pressing on after a moment. "Who are you so angry at that you won't even spare me a mere 100 taels?" Obviously at mother. The mention of Luo Chishu sparked a flicker of anger in Xiao Lihua's eyes, her tone sharpening. "She didn't care one bit about my future. She actually went through with divorcing father. She's so cold-hearted. And you and father, two grown men, couldn't even keep an old woman in line. You're completely useless." With that, she let out a disdainful snort, leaped down from the roof, and vanished back into the Eastern Palace. Xiao Fengye couldn't help but think his sister was truly being willful and unreasonable. But more than that, he seethed at his own helplessness. He quickly assessed his chances of sneaking into the Eastern Palace to steal money from his sister. If he spent a few more years practicing his lightness kung fu, he could pull off being a silent rooftop thief without a hitch. But if he forced his way in now, gossip about him would spread through the capital by tomorrow. Xiao Fengye, the general's son, forced his way into the Eastern Palace to rob it and was arrested. Sentenced to 3 years in prison. Forget it. A wise man doesn't fight when the odds are against him. Xiao Fengye forced an awkward smile, turned on his heel, and trudged back toward the general's mansion. If no one else would manage the household, then he'd do it himself. His wandering thoughts gradually drifted back to the present. Luo Chishu realized she'd finished a cup of ginseng tea without noticing. Lifting her eyes to meet his gaze, Xiao Fengye rubbed his nose awkwardly. But as you know, Mother, I have classes at the Imperial Academy during the day, and I only have time to go through the account books when I return to the mansion at night. It's really been draining the life out of me. He was waking up earlier than the roosters and sleeping later than the cats. For the first time, he truly understood the bone-deep exhaustion of slaving away to manage a household, while also dealing with endless family disputes. His mother had raised him and his sister all by herself, while also constantly sending money to support their father at the border, yet no one had ever understood how hard she'd worked. Mother, will you come back? Luo Chishu could clearly see the flicker of hope in his eyes. Her fingers tightened around her teacup, and she closed her eyes briefly, overcome by a wave of indescribable weariness. Why couldn't her children ever grow up, when she was their age, on top of managing the entire household? She'd also buried her nose in thick volumes of books, painstakingly studying the 4 books and 5 classics page by page, just so she could check Xiao Fengye's schoolwork for him. But children grew up so fast, she'd never had enough time to learn everything, and gradually, they drifted apart, with nothing left to talk about. Luo Chishu gazed out the bamboo window at the setting sun, her voice soft as she replied to her son, "That place is not my home anymore. I will never go back. Besides, if you and Mujini want to learn how to manage the household, you need to start by learning how to read account books. You can ask the chief accountant for guidance on that. Maintaining connections in the capital is also essential. Go find Nanny Lee, who used to serve your father. She knows all the family secrets and preferences of the high officials. Be sure to take notes on everything she tells you." She paused for a moment, then continued, "Then send someone to verify the information. After all, Nanny Lee is quite old now. She might have misremembered some things." Every word was the last vestige of warmth she could offer this son of hers. A flicker of guilt and gratitude crossed Xiao Fengye's eyes. As if finally realizing how much his father had wronged his mother, he cleared his throat, his tone softening. "Mother, if you're still angry about father taking a mistress, I can have Aunt Mu sent back to the border or to her own family." Luo Chishu felt a faint flicker of surprise in her heart. Was he suddenly having a change of heart and taking her side, or was he just pretending to curry favor with her? But no matter which it was, nothing could change her mind now. "There's no need for that. Don't come looking for me again. I have left the general's mansion. I am no longer your mother, and I no longer have a son like you." With that, she waved her hand, and several guards immediately rushed forward, dragging Xiao Fengye out of the courtyard and tossing him outside the gate. At the exact moment the courtyard door slammed shut behind him, Luo Chishu caught a clear glimpse of Xiao Fengye's deathly pale face. His expression one of utter disbelief that she would throw her own son out like this, doing such a thing to a child she had raised for decades. Inevitably, it made her heart ache. Luo Chishu couldn't remember exactly when Xiao Fengye had started growing so distant from her. From the moment he was born, he'd been showered with all the love and affection she and the Xiao family had to give. Even Xiao Lihua hadn't been doted on as much as he was. Xiao Chu's mother had been terrified that this only grandson would follow in the footsteps of the previous generals of the Xiao family and die on the battlefield. So she'd spent a fortune hiring the most renowned scholar of the time to teach him. That scholar had told him, at all times, "You must put your own interests first." Xiao Chu's mother had only meant for Xiao Fengye to avoid recklessly charging into battle and throwing his life away when he grew up and went to war. She'd never imagined that now, Xiao Fengye had grown into a complete and utter selfish man. He could apologize to her with such a natural tone, then turn around and drive Mu Yunjin, the woman he'd once adored, out of the mansion without a second thought. After Xiao Fengye left, Luo Chishu lost all appetite for her meal. She told Nanny Wang and the others to eat without her, then stepped out of the house, taking a leisurely stroll along the bustling streets. It was spring. The cries of street vendors filled the air, drifting into her ears. Luo Chishu wandered along, stopping to look at a stall selling eggs, when she overheard some people chatting at a nearby tea stand. "Have you heard? That old General Xiao in the capital is already 1 foot in the grave, and he still married a beautiful young bride." "Beautiful young bride? You've got it wrong, it's an old woman. That old woman was the one General Xiao was in love with when he was young. But their families were from different social classes, so they had to part ways." As the townsfolk chatted, they began to realize something was amiss. If Mu Yunjin is 3 years older than old General Xiao, then she must have been married before, and old General Xiao already had a legal wife. Am I the only one who feels sorry for his first wife, the one who served her parents-in-law for over 20 years and raised their children all by herself? Luo Chishu smiled faintly to herself. She didn't care whether anyone felt sorry for her or not. After all, she was already old. What was the point of dwelling on such things? When she'd first married Xiao Chu, she'd had no idea he was still so hung up on Mu Yunjin. If she had known, she would have let him go a long time ago. She wouldn't have wasted half her life on him. Later, when her father-in-law and mother-in-law had fallen gravely ill, on the verge of death, paralyzed in bed from strokes, that had been the hardest time of Luo Chishu's life, because her daughter had suddenly had a fit of stubbornness, insisting she wanted to marry the crown prince, and if she was going to marry the crown prince, her dowry had to be sufficiently lavish. She'd emptied half her dowry to fund it, then, to pay for her in-laws' medical treatments. She'd drained even more of her dowry savings. Luo Chishu had rushed from taking care of one person to the next, with no rest in between. When she'd returned to the cold, empty Osmanthus courtyard at the end of the day, she'd thought countless times that it would be better to just die. She was such a failure. What was the point of living? Taking care of the young, then the old, taking care of the old, then the young again. She'd finally endured until her mother-in-law passed away. Then her son and daughter-in-law had had a grandson. Luo Chishu had thought this was a joyous occasion, and immediately ordered her servants to send Mu genie bolts of fine silk and satin. She'd even taken off the Xiao family's heirloom emerald jade bracelet, the one passed down from generation to generation, and placed it on Mu genie's wrist. This bracelet has been passed down through 9 generations of the Xiao family. With you, it will be the 10th. The 10th generation. It should have been a time of perfection and completion. Mu Genie had smiled brightly and thanked her profusely, but as soon as she turned around, Luo Chishu had heard her muttering quietly to her maid, "She gave me such a tacky thing." Luo Chishu had practiced martial arts since she was a child. With sharp ears and keen eyes, she'd heard every word clearly. She hadn't been angry, just a little uncomfortable. She'd felt like she'd been trying so hard to curry favor with her daughter-in-law, but her efforts had gone completely unappreciated. But then she'd thought young people were just like that. They said whatever was on their minds, no filter. Being foolish and straightforward was common enough. For a moment, Luo Chishu had envied their freedom to speak their minds without hesitation, pulling herself back from her memories. Luo Chishu realized she'd wandered back to the peach blossom courtyard without noticing. As soon as Zixia saw her, she hurried over to support her. Luo Chishu asked casually, as if it were an afterthought, "I heard Mu Genie went back to her maiden home." Zixia blinked in surprise, then nodded, "I think so." Luo Chishu let out a soft sigh. Compared to her, I was really such a coward, wasting away in that oppressive, cold general's mansion that drained the life out of me until I was 45 years old. Zixia blinked again, taken aback. "How could you say that, my lady? You're so brave running away from the general's mansion in pursuit of freedom. Zixia truly admires you for it." Luo Chishu shook her head, smiling faintly. That's not it at all. It wasn't freedom she'd been after. At her age, what freedom did she need? It wasn't that she loved the outside world so much. And this wasn't really her home anymore either, not since her mother had passed away. She'd only run away because she'd known she was dying soon. Xixia comforted her for a while, then began telling her all the interesting news from around Zhenju. Luo Chishu listened quietly, a faint smile on her face. Being around young people always put her at ease. By April, business in Zhenju had entered a slump. Thanks to days of continuous heavy rain, few people ventured out to go shopping. The old leg pain Luo Chishu had suffered from for years flared up again in the rainy weather, a sharp, stabbing ache that plagued her constantly. After seeing a doctor for 2 days, she gathered her merchant caravan, deciding to travel to foreign lands to trade in imitation goods. She wanted to leave the rainy, dismal Zhenju behind, and take the chance to see the sights she'd never had the opportunity to witness in her youth, traveling southward. They passed through shifting clouds and evening rains, with rivers and mountains stretching endlessly under a clear blue sky. Along the way, more and more merchant caravans joined their group, bringing their own goods. By the time they reached foreign lands, their combined caravan was so large that the locals mistook them for an invading army. Sand and wind billowed across the sky as their long line of carriages rumbled forward, traveling farther and farther away from home. If it had been just one caravan, they might have been afraid, but with thousands of merchants traveling together, everyone felt relaxed and at ease. The scorching sun hung high in the sky, as green, spiky plants sprouted from the sand dunes of the desert. A well-traveled merchant pointed them out, saying, "Those are prickly pears." Luo Chishu found them fascinating, plucking a 2-inch-long thorn to keep as a souvenir. Besides that, she also witnessed the miraculous sight of a mirage in the desert. She saw people with dark skin, and encountered many things that people from the Great Xia Empire had never laid eyes on before. In all her past life, she'd never heard of a woman traveling far from home, let alone a woman traveling to foreign countries, especially not an old woman like her. After setting up camp in the desert, everyone tied their camels to some unknown trees scattered across the sand. Xixia walked over to her, handing her a piece of flatbread and a charred skewer of lamb. "Please have something to eat, my lady." Luo Chishu took the food from her hand. The relentless wind and sand of the past few days had tanned her skin a warm wheat color, yet her gaze was soft as she looked off into the distance. As she ate, she overheard several foreign merchants and travelers whispering among themselves behind her back. "How dare that old woman travel all the way here from Zhenju in the Central Plains? Doesn't she fear her bones will fall apart at her age? You clearly don't know who she is. She's no ordinary woman, she's the one from the general's mansion." Luo Chishu chewed her flatbread silently, listening to their gossip with amusement. The foreign merchant suddenly realized, a discarded wife. Xixia's expression darkened instantly. She was about to storm over and give them a piece of her mind, but Luo Chishu stopped her with a gentle gesture. Instead, the other travelers from Zhenju immediately jumped in to retort. "You sure have a lot of nerve saying that. I can barely stand to listen. Let me tell you something. That old lady is an old friend of His Majesty the Emperor himself." One of them chimed in eagerly the moment he heard that. "Actually, I've been wanting to say this. His Majesty even wanted to take that old lady into the palace as a concubine." A sudden fit of coughing erupted among the group. The merchant who'd spoken froze, then turned around, and there stood Luo Chishu right in front of him, a faint, amused smile playing on her lips. "A concubine? Who are you talking about?" Snickers broke out all around them. The merchant's face turned bright red with embarrassment. He stammered, unable to get out a single coherent sentence. I, Luo Chishu smiled gently. "I don't think His Majesty was planning to make you his concubine." The entire group burst into loud laughter. The merchant, utterly mortified, jumped to his feet and fled as fast as he could. It was then that everyone finally took a good look at Luo Chishu. She was tall and elegant, exuding an air of quiet nobility that was impossible to ignore. Her features were bright and striking, nurtured by a life of wealth and comfort. Even at 4 to 5 years old, she looked no more than 30. With just a touch of makeup, she would have been absolutely breathtaking. The merchant suddenly understood exactly why His Majesty the Emperor had wanted to bring her into the imperial palace, to keep her in a golden chamber fit for a queen. Sand billowed across the sky when a sudden scream pierced the air. Everyone's hearts sank. They turned to look, and there was the merchant who just run off, trapped waist-deep in the quicksand, screaming for help. Through the swirling sand and wind, two figures charged toward him without hesitation, struggling to pull him free. By the time they dragged him to safety, Luo Chishu's clothes were covered in sand from head to toe. The merchant, who'd narrowly escaped death, burst into tears. Thanking her profusely, the sun shone down on the golden sea of sand, and the lively atmosphere among the group was restored once more. They smiled at Luo Chishu in admiration. "We never would have guessed someone of your age would have such impressive skills and strength." Luo Chishu laughed along with them. "Thank you for the compliment. Before she'd married and left her maiden home, she'd been a woman who wielded swords and spears with pride. She'd loved all things bold and passionate, all things that set her heart racing. But after marrying Xiao Chu, she'd lost even her own freedom, and gradually, she'd stopped loving the thrill of holding a spear." The final leg of their journey took Luo Chishu and the other merchants another full month. They traded in an unknown foreign land, exchanging tea and porcelain for countless treasures, colorful gemstones, exotic fruits and spices. On their journey back home, they were hit by both a sandstorm and a dust devil. Fortunately, they managed to find a cave to take shelter in. Once the winds had died down, they continued their trek through the endless sea of yellow sand, step by arduous step. "My lady," Zixua's voice was filled with excitement and relief. "We're here." Luo Chishu pulled off her veil and looked up. The sky was a clear, cloudless blue. Majestic city walls rose up before them, with red banners fluttering proudly in the wind. "Zhenju," Luo Chishu blinked, coming back to her senses, and continued walking forward. "Zixia, it feels like I've been gone for 7 months, yet it seems like it was only yesterday that I left." Zixia nodded in agreement. Not much has changed in Zhenju, but while the place hadn't changed much, some people's attitudes certainly had. As soon as Luo Chishu returned to Zhenju, her steward came to report that Xiao Chu had sent her 200 letters over the past 7 months. She couldn't help but find it both absurd and faintly ridiculous. In their 30 years of marriage, Xiao Chu had sent her barely a handful of family letters. Yet now, she'd been gone for only half a year, and he was writing to her constantly, as if his life depended on it. Luo Chishu stared coldly at the pile of letters, a flash of anger flickering in her dark eyes. Every single letter was filled with Xiao Chu complaining about one problem after another back home. His old injuries had flared up again. But he couldn't find the medicinal ointments she used to make for him, and Xiao Fengye had gotten into a fight with Minister Shi's son at the Imperial Academy, and he was asking her what Minister Shi's likes and dislikes were, so he could apologize properly. Was he treating her like some kind of official's memorandum tablet, to be consulted only when he needed something? Luo Chishu wanted nothing to do with it. She ordered her servants to burn all the letters, and forbade them from accepting any more letters from Xiao Chu in the future. But Zixia stepped forward to stop her. "My lady, why don't we keep the letters instead? We can send them to Mu Yunjin as a birthday gift when her birthday comes around." Zixia was just getting into the swing of her idea when Luo Chishu was about to refuse, when a knock suddenly sounded at the door behind them. When the door was opened, there stood Xiao Lihua, her expression unreadable, the moment she saw Luo Chishu. The frown on her face vanished instantly, replaced by a faint, enigmatic smile that reminded one of a Buddha statue in a temple. "Mother, at long last, I've finally waited for you to come home." Luo Chishu froze in surprise, asking her coldly, "What do you want with me?" Xiao Lihua fell silent for a moment, then said simply, "Mother, you've gotten tanned. Luo Chishu remained unmoved. Don't change the subject. Xiao Lihua looked her straight in the eye. I'm here to take you back with me. Luo Chishu called her by her full name, her voice sharp. Xiao Lihua, I told you last time to respect my choices. The emperor himself approved of my divorce from your father. I beg you not to interfere in my life any further. Zixia glared at Xiao Lihua, muttering under her breath. Some people just can't remember a single word you say. Their ears are just for show. Xiao Lihua didn't get angry. Instead, she smiled faintly. She stepped aside, lowering her eyes. If mother is unwilling to come with me willingly, then I have no choice but to order my men to use force. Luo Chishu had never imagined that Xiao Lihua hadn't come here disguised, but had arrived in a grand, ostentatious procession with a large retinue of men. The crown princess personally invited her mother to board a luxurious golden carriage with copper eaves, and they set off directly for the capital city. Naturally, Zixia and the others refused to stand by and watch. They climbed onto their horses in outrage and followed closely behind, and to their surprise, the crown princess's guards made no attempt to drive them away. Curious townsfolk gathered along the streets, craning their necks to get a look. All they could see was the vague figure of a young woman and a beautiful middle-aged lady sitting side by side inside the carriage, behind a curtain of hanging pearls. How magnificent! Xiao Lihua smiled at the sound of the townsfolk's exclamations. Mother, do you see? Only power and status can earn the admiration of the world. Luo Chishu shot her a glance, then closed her eyes to rest. She was afraid she wouldn't be able to resist lecturing Xiao Lihua about her extravagance. After all, this was her daughter, the child she'd carried in her womb for 10 months. The child she'd raised with her own hands. When Lihua had been 1 year old, she'd refused to let anyone else hold her, screaming her head off whenever someone tried. But the moment Luo Chishu picked her up, she'd stop crying instantly. Even Xiao Chu's mother had said, "What a stubborn child, she knows exactly who she likes." As soon as Xiao Lihua grew up, she'd become fiercely independent and headstrong. The world says women must be gentle and virtuous. I refuse. The world says the Eastern Palace is a den of dragons and tigers, a dangerous place. I insist on entering it anyway. Luo Chishu blinked, coming back to her senses, and couldn't help but rub her temples with a sigh. Seeing this, Xiao Lihua scowled and tossed a sandalwood incense burner out of the carriage. Luo Chishu was shocked. Wait, a dull thud sounded outside the carriage, as if something made of copper had collided with a person. But when Luo Chishu looked out the window, she saw a townsman holding the incense burner in his hands, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Thank you for your generosity, Crown Princess. That incense burner is inlaid with gold and jade, a treasure no ordinary person could ever hope to own in a lifetime." Xiao Lihua's voice echoed softly inside the carriage. Luo Chishu turned to her sharply, frowning. "That's no excuse to throw things around recklessly. What if you'd hit someone and killed them?" Xiao Lihua's expression darkened, and she was about to throw a fit, pulling rank as crown princess. But then she thought better of it, swallowing her anger. "I understand." Luo Chishu let out a long sigh and closed her eyes again to rest. When she opened them once more, they had already arrived at the capital city. The carriage came to a stop right in front of the gates of the general's mansion. Xiao Chu, dressed in his purple official robes, stood at the gate with Mu Yunjin and Xiao Fengye by his side. Luo Chishu glanced at them. Noting that all of them looked haggard and worn out, especially Xiao Chu. Dark circles hung under his eyes, making him look as if he hadn't slept in days. The moment he saw her, he strode forward, reaching out his hand to help her down from the carriage. Luo Chishu dodged his hand, a flash of coldness in her eyes. "Did you order Lihua to kidnap me and bring me back here?" Xiao Chu winced at the coldness in her gaze. He pressed his lips together, then said honestly, "No. But I did give her my permission. Aiki, the general's mansion cannot survive without you. I cannot survive without you." Luo Chishu's eyes were as calm and still as water, her voice steady and emotionless. You managed perfectly well without me for decades at the border, didn't you? An awkward silence fell over the scene. Before Xiao Chu could say anything else, Xiao Fengye spoke up first. Mother, now that you're back, please come inside the mansion and stay. I've missed you so much. Luo Chishu was momentarily stunned by his sudden display of affection. She looked at Xiao Fengye's face, and only then did she notice the black and blue bruises covering his face, identical to Xiao Chu's. It looked like he'd been in a fight. After saying that, Xiao Fengye fell silent, just staring at her with an earnest, pleading look in his eyes. Luo Chishu asked him flatly, "Did Minister Shi's son do this to you?" Xiao Fengye's eyes lit up with hope, then dimmed again as he nodded dejectedly, "Yes. He insulted father, saying he'd abandoned his old love for a new one." Luo Chishu listened to him quietly, saying nothing. Once upon a time, she would have felt her heart ache for him, and then she would have gone to avenge him, to get justice for her son. But now, she couldn't help but think that Minister Shi had raised his son well. Xiao Fengye rambled on for a long time, but when he saw that Luo Chishu wasn't reacting at all, he trailed off awkwardly, falling silent. Ever since he'd entered the Imperial Academy, he'd rarely been wronged, and even more rarely had he acted so clingy and affectionate toward his mother. Luo Chishu's cold, indifferent attitude made his chest feel tight and uncomfortable, yet he couldn't find a single thing to fault her for in her lack of response. Xiao Chu's expression was also uneasy. He looked at Luo Chishu. "Let's go inside and talk, shall we?" A crowd of onlookers had already gathered in front of the general's mansion, eager to watch the drama unfold, but Luo Chishu stood her ground, not moving an inch. Xiao Chu raised his voice slightly, "Aiki." Luo Chishu's gaze swept past Xiao Chu, landing on the faces of the townsfolk gathered around them. "Xiao Chu, you wronged me first. For 30 years, you lied to me and kept secrets from me, yet I never once thought of taking revenge on you. But you are greedy and selfish. You only want my money and my property. If you insist on forcing me to stay here, then I don't mind going to the capital's government office to file a complaint, even at my age." With that, she turned to leave, ignoring the varied expressions on everyone's faces. But Xiao Chu grabbed her wrist, his voice humble and pleading, "I don't want your money. I just want our family to be together again, whole and complete." Family. The word family landed in Luo Chishu's heart, stirring nothing but bitter irony. She turned around, her voice calm and steady. "I will be far better off without all of you, won't I?" Xiao Chu froze, his eyes swirling with a jumble of emotions he couldn't name. He couldn't put into words the complicated mess of feelings churning in his chest, yet he knew she was right. His gaze fell on her sun-kissed face, weathered by wind and sand, and he hesitated, his words catching in his throat. "It's all our fault. We drove you away. That's why you hid from us in the scorching desert for 7 whole months." Luo Chishu's voice turned cold. "It was not because of you." But Xiao Chu still looked at her with that pitying gaze. I know, whenever people looked at her like that, it meant they didn't believe a single word she said. His tone grated on her nerves. She took a deep breath. "Have you ever taken a 7-month vacation in your life?" The expressions of everyone present froze instantly, especially Xiao Chu. Luo Chishu fixed her eyes on him, her voice flat. "Forget 7 months. In all your years as an official, have you ever taken more than 7 days off other than for your father's and mother's funerals? 7 days free from politics, 7 days to roam the mountains and rivers? And you, Mu Yunjin, year in and year out, your life has been nothing but bearing children and raising them, hasn't it? Have you ever taken a single day off in your entire life?" The words hit them like a punch to the gut. "Stop talking," they exclaimed in unison. Mu Yunjin's eyes reddened. She clutched her handkerchief, dabbing at the corners of her eyes. "For the general, I did it willingly." Her voice trembled, the words without rest sticking in her throat, impossible to utter. Xiao Chu closed his eyes. He took several long moments to compose himself. Then said to Luo Chishu, "Even if you have wealth to rely on now, what happens when you grow old? Who will take care of you in your final years?" Luo Chishu replied calmly, "I have my servants, I have my friends," Xiao Chu persisted, "but none of them can ever be as close to you as your own flesh and blood children." Such was the way of the world. If an elderly person had no children by their side, they might die alone, and no one would even find their body until it was too late. Luo Chishu looked at him quietly. Some unfilial children are so greedy that they would poison their parents' medicine to seize their family fortune the moment they fall seriously ill. She cast a sidelong glance, her eyes as sharp as cold blades, piercing straight into the hearts of Xiao Fengye and Xiao Lihua. No one from the Xiao family dared to stop Luo Chishu anymore. Their faces were all somber and grim. Xiao Lihua shot Mu Yunjin a meaningful look, then turned and walked away from the Xiao mansion without a backward glance. The remaining members of the family filed silently back into the house, sitting in the main hall and staring blankly at the table laden with delicacies. The feast had been specially ordered from the finest restaurant in the capital, a celebration to welcome Luo Chishu home. Xiao Fengye picked up his chopsticks, breaking the heavy silence. "There's a popular hot dish in the capital called deep-fried shrimp balls. You mustn't eat them in a hurry, or you'll burn your tongue, but with their crispy outer layer and tender, chewy shrimp filling inside, they cost 10 taels of silver a plate. Everyone, please have a taste." After the servants finished serving the food, Xiao Chu still hadn't touched his chopsticks. Afraid that Xiao Fengye would feel awkward, Mu Yunjin picked up a shrimp ball, blew on it to cool it down, then popped it into her mouth. The moment she bit down, a sharp pain shot through her gums. Mu Yunjin frowned, feeling as if she'd bitten down on a piece of stone. A metallic taste flooded her tongue. She covered her mouth with her handkerchief and coughed, and out came a broken tooth. In an instant, Mu Yunjin's face turned ashen, then flushed bright red with embarrassment. Xiao Fengye froze mid-motion, holding his chopsticks in the air, staring at her with a complex expression. Xiao Chu suddenly stood up, leaving nothing but a scathing remark behind. "Knowing full well that your teeth are worn out from old age, you still insist on making a fool of yourself like this." Mu Yunjin felt a chill run down her spine at his words. Was this his way of saying he was starting to despise her for growing old and losing her looks? It was late afternoon, the hour of shun. Luo Chishu returned from the Xiao mansion to the small courtyard she'd rented in the capital. The house had blue-tiled roofs, and was just a street away from the busiest market in the city. It was the smallest residence she'd ever lived in. If it were any smaller, even her entourage would have had to stay at an inn. Her servants had already moved all her new furniture and belongings into the house. Ordinarily, when moving into a new home, everyone would gather at the gate to welcome the master, setting off firecrackers to add to the festive atmosphere. But today, the courtyard gate was eerily quiet and still. Luo Chishu stood in the main hall, her eyes calm. As she watched a man dressed in a black brocade robe sitting on a sandalwood chair, pouring wine for himself and drinking alone, as if he, Yi Hanqing, were the true master of this house. "Your Majesty," she bowed respectfully. Yi Hanqing took his time sipping his tea, then gestured casually, "Sit. Make yourself at home, it's your own house." After all, a flicker of helplessness crossed Luo Chishu's eyes, so he did know it was her home. She chose not to dwell on the emperor's audacity in trespassing on private property. She walked over and took a seat to the lower right of Yi Hanqing. "Is your Majesty here on any important business?" Yi Hanqing set down his teacup, lifting his eyes to meet hers. "I heard the crown princess had you abducted and brought back to the capital. I came to see if you needed me to stand up for you." Luo Chishu fell silent for a moment. There was no need to trouble the emperor. The Xiao family's domestic squabbles were hardly serious enough to warrant the intervention of His Majesty the Emperor. Yi Hanqing looked at her deeply. "Actually, Xiao Lihua is very much like you." Luo Chishu blinked in surprise. then smiled, her voice gentle yet firm. "She and I are nothing alike." But Yi Hanqing refused to let it go. "No, you are very much alike. The crown prince does not like strong-willed women like Li Hua," yet she insisted on marrying him anyway. "Xiao Chu did not love you, yet you turned down the marriage proposal I sent you, choosing instead to marry him. You and your daughter are both hopeless romantics. You just have terrible taste in men. But then again, it's only natural. That child was raised by your own hands, so she has inherited your stubborn streak." His words were like sharp, icy awls, piercing straight into her heart. For a moment, Luo Chishu was left completely speechless, defenseless. But then the phrase "turned down the marriage proposal I sent you" jolted her out of her embarrassment. What marriage proposal? She'd never heard of any such thing. Among all the marriage proposals her mother had presented to her back then, there had been no offer from Yi Hanqing. Luo Chishu was shocked to the core, but she managed to keep her expression perfectly calm and composed. Before she could recover from her daze, Yi Hanqing stood up. "The day after tomorrow is the winter solstice. There will be a grand banquet held in the palace." He glanced at her, his voice steady. "Whether you come or not, it's entirely up to you." Luo Chishu did not hesitate for a moment. "I'll go. Why ever would I not?" She was already separated from Xiao Chu. She was no longer the trapped, neglected old mistress of the Xiao mansion. She was Luo Chishu, her own person. Now that she finally had time to herself, she was determined to reclaim every part of herself that she had lost and abandoned over the years. Turning down an invitation to a palace banquet was simply not in her nature. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Yi Hanqing's lips. Luo Chishu wondered if she was imagining things. What was His Majesty smiling about? But when she looked again, the smile had vanished without a trace. Yi Hanqing's expression was once more solemn and dignified. Just like always, he said nothing more. Turning on his heel and striding toward the gate, Nanny Wang, who had been standing quietly by the side, let out a long, heartfelt sigh. In her eyes, Yi Hanqing was nothing like Xiao Chu. If it had been Xiao Chu, he would have merely tossed an invitation card at Luo Chishu, then ordered her to attend the banquet as a matter of course, brooking no refusal. But Yi Hanqing, despite being the emperor of the entire realm, had left the choice entirely up to Luo Chishu. His Majesty truly is worthy of being an emperor. His breadth of mind is extraordinary, and his attitude toward you is so gentle and considerate. She was still sighing in admiration when Luo Chishu's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Nanny Wang, you are an old servant who has been with me since I left the Luo family. Do you know anything about a marriage proposal that His Majesty supposedly sent to me back in the day?" Nanny Wang frowned, thinking hard for a moment, then shook her head. "I have never heard of such a thing, my lady." Luo Chishu chose not to dwell on the matter further, waving her hand to dismiss everyone to go about their duties. After her trip to the foreign lands, she felt an overwhelming sense of fatigue. She sat down on the edge of the bed and began folding her clothes one by one. These clothes were all the ones she'd brought with her when she left the Xiao mansion, and they were all clothes she'd bought for herself. The only new dress Xiao Chu had ever bought her was when she was young. After that, he'd never added a single new garment to her wardrobe. But now that they were divorced, she no longer cared about such trivial things. Once she'd finished folding all her clothes, Luo Chishu leaned back against the pile of garments and drifted off into a deep sleep. No doubt because she'd seen Xiao Chu earlier that day, she dreamed of the day she'd first married him. It had been an auspicious day, filled with joy. Red dragon and phoenix candles flickered gently in the bridal chamber. The heavy phoenix coronet and embroidered robe on her head had been too much for Luo Chishu to bear, but instead of taking them off, she'd gritted her teeth and decided to lie down flat on the bed. That way, her neck wouldn't get tired. But the silk quilt had been so soft and comfortable that she'd fallen asleep before she knew it. She'd woken up when Xiao Chu tucked the quilt around her shoulders. The air had been filled with the mouth-watering aroma of roast chicken, Luo Chishu's eyes had sparkled with delight. General, Xiao Chu had not been wearing his cold, imposing armor, nor the festive red wedding robes. He'd been dressed only in a plain white inner garment. The white fabric had softened the stern, killing intent in his expression, revealing a hint of the otherworldly elegance of an immortal untouched by mortal dust. I brought you some roast chicken. Luo Chishu's gaze had been fixed on the golden, crispy roast chicken laid out on the table. So focused was she on the food that she'd completely missed the utter calm and indifference in Xiao Chu's eyes. He'd looked at her not like a husband looking at his wife, but like a general looking at a fellow officer, and his act of bringing her food had been nothing more than a matter of routine, a duty to be fulfilled. When Luo Chishu opened her eyes again, she found herself lying in bed. The sky outside the window had grown dark. Nanny Wang was sitting by the bedside, keeping watch over her. She let out a soft sigh of relief when she saw Luo Chishu wake up. "You were so tired, my lady, that's why you slept so soundly." Luo Chishu slowly sat up, smiling faintly. "I'd originally planned to go for a stroll around the capital, but the moment my head hit the pillow, I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. Nanny, I dreamed of the past, the day I married Xiao Chu. If only there were a medicine for regret in this world, I would never have married him." Nanny Wang paused for a moment before replying. If the old general hadn't taken a mistress outside, he really would have been a good husband, a handsome, tall scion of a prestigious military family. How could he not have been considered a good match? Luo Chishu fell silent for a few seconds, then looked at her. "Nanny, why are you speaking up for Xiao Chu today?" Nanny Wang clasped her hands tightly together, her expression filled with hesitation and unease. "When you asked me about the marriage proposal earlier today, my lady, I took the liberty of going to inquire with the old steward who used to work for the Luo family in the afternoon. The steward was now very old. After receiving his pension from the Luo family, he'd left the estate and moved to live in the capital." Luo Chishu frowned, confused by her meaning. Nanny Wang squeezed her hands tightly, then continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Your mother, she hid the marriage proposal that His Majesty sent you from you back then." Luo Chishu froze, stunned into silence. Nanny Wang hurried to explain. "In truth, Madame Luo was only doing what she thought was best for you. She never wanted to use her daughter's marriage to curry favor with the powerful and influential. She only wished that you would marry a man who would love you wholeheartedly, promising you a lifetime of fidelity, just the two of you, no one else." It was precisely during the time when Madame Luo had been selecting a husband for her daughter that the Xiao family had approached them with their proposal. The Xiao family had pledged that their son would marry only Luo Chishu, taking no other wives or concubines. Madame Luo had been reluctant to agree at first, but then Madame Xiao had said, "Why don't our two families ask His Majesty the Emperor to bestow his royal blessing on this marriage, with an imperial mandate sealing your daughter's fate? Surely that will put your mind at ease." Madame Luo had thought it over carefully. The Xiao family was a prestigious military clan. When Xiao Chu went off to war in the future, Luo Chishu would not have to worry about waiting on her husband hand and foot. Most importantly, she would hold the entire general's mansion in her grasp. Overseeing all its business ventures in the capital, she could enjoy a life of wealth and luxury without having to compete with concubines for her husband's affection. If she had married into the imperial family, such a life would have been utterly impossible. Luo Chishu lowered her eyes slightly, running her fingers over the golden-laid agate bracelet on her wrist. "It's just a pity that mother never imagined how destitute the Xiao family really was." The bulk of her substantial dowry had been spent propping up the Xiao household, and Xiao Chu had even taken the money she'd earned over the years to support his mistress. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Xiao Chu had come to see her several times during this period, but he'd been turned away at the courtyard gate each time. The sun was shining brightly when Luo Chishu stepped out of the courtyard and boarded her carriage bound for the palace. along the way. The raucous cries of street vendors filled the air. Winter solstice today, sweet glutinous rice balls and pork dumplings for sale, only 10 coins apiece. Upon entering the palace, Luo Chishu found that numerous officials and their families had already arrived. Several noble ladies who knew her smiled and gathered around to chat. Their conversation meandered from one trivial topic to another, eventually settling on Mu Yunjin. I heard from my servants that Mu Yunjin has been sending people to the medical hall and the cosmetics shop non-stop lately. She's already so old, could she still be trying to doll herself up? It's not about dressing up, it's about covering up the wrinkles on her face. They say she's grown old and lost her looks, and the old general has started to disdain her. Luo Chishu listened to their gossip quietly, not the least bit surprised. As night fell, the slanting shadows stretched longer and longer. The guests chatted amiably as they filed into the celebration hall. Luo Chishu chose a seat at random, across from her. Xiao Chu, dressed in his purple official robes, seemed to sense her gaze and looked up, their eyes meeting. His Majesty arrives, a shrill, high-pitched voice echoed through the hall. Luo Chishu rose respectfully along with everyone else to pay homage. Yi Hanqing walked past her, pausing briefly in front of her seat before continuing on to take his place on the throne. After he finished delivering a string of formal remarks, the guests were finally allowed to sit back down. Drums and music struck up in unison. Palace maids filed in, carrying platters of fruits and delicacies. Luo Chishu took a sip of plum wine, her brows furrowing slightly. Yi Hanqing's gaze happened to fall on her. He smiled. Is there something wrong with the wine? Luo Chishu didn't want to say outright that the wine was sour and bitter, a truly ill-chosen beverage for a palace banquet. She only replied, I'm simply not much of a drinker. Yi Hanqing fixed his eyes on her, his voice warm. This wine is brewed from plums from your hometown. Though it's a bit bitter, it's worth a try all the same. With that, he turned to chat with the officials seated nearby. Luo Chishu smiled and turned her attention back to the feast before her. On the other side of the hall, Xiao Chu stared at the two of them intently, his face alternating between livid and deathly pale. From those brief 2 sentences alone, he could tell beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were old acquaintances. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning, sending a cold chill coursing through his veins. He suddenly understood why His Majesty had approved Luo Chishu's petition for a divorce. They'd had a relationship long before this. An official beside him, oblivious to his turmoil, said, Old General, I called your name several times just now. Why didn't you answer? Xiao Chu gritted his teeth, a cold laugh escaping his lips. I'm just watching a good show. The official was even more confused. He glanced around, seeing nothing out of the ordinary except for the general's ex-wife rising from her seat, followed shortly by His Majesty, who announced he was stepping out for some fresh air. When he turned back, he found that Xiao Chu's seat was also empty. The general had already made his way to the door. When Xiao Chu followed them to the imperial garden, he saw Yi Hanqing standing with his hands behind his back by the lake, while Luo Chishu washed her hands at the water's edge. What were they doing? The thought flashed through his mind first, only to be quickly dismissed by reason. They were both well past their prime. What could they possibly be up to? Fragments of their conversation drifted over to him on the breeze. Yi Hanqing asked, Do you intend to leave your money to that ex-husband of yours who's always had his heart set on someone else? Or do you prefer his children instead? Luo Chishu replied coolly, I'll leave it to neither. I've spent far more money on the Xiao family than I ever did on myself. I could tolerate it for my parents-in-law and the children, but why should I have to support everyone else too? I've already endured as much as I can from them. If they dare to come pestering me again, I might just have to consider hiring someone to get rid of them. Yi Hanqing chuckled. That's the Luo Chishu I know. Xiao Chu hid behind a rockery, his eyes fixed on them. At that moment, the concern Yi Hanqing had shown her at the banquet, his familiar tone of voice, and Luo Chishu's boldness in opposing the general's mansion all clicked together in his mind. His feet moved of their own accord as he stepped out from his hiding place, grabbing Luo Chishu's wrist. "Did you leave the general's mansion just to enter the palace?" Yi Hanqing's expression darkened slightly. He was about to call for guards to drag Xiao Chu away, but Luo Chishu looked directly into Xiao Chu's eyes. Memories of him flooded her mind, the joy she'd felt when she first married him, and the plate of roast chicken he'd brought her just in time when she'd been starving with hunger, the time she'd fallen asleep at her desk while sorting out account books, and he'd draped a cloak over her shoulders to shield her from the cold wind blowing through the window, and Mu Yunjin, standing between them like an insurmountable chasm, pulling herself back to the present. Luo Chishu gave him her answer, "No. I left because I don't love you anymore. You are an undefeated general on the battlefield, revered and beloved by the people. But to me, you have only ever left me feeling cold and disappointed." A sense of powerlessness washed over Xiao Chu as he stared at her. He wanted so badly to ask if he had never taken Mu Yunjin as his mistress. Would they have ended up here? But the words remained unspoken. Yi Hanqing's voice cut through the air. "Old general, will you not release her hand?" Xiao Chu stared blankly at her for a moment before slowly letting go of her wrist. He bowed deeply. "Please forgive my rudeness, Your Majesty. I've had too much to drink. I take my leave." Yi Hanqing fixed his gaze on Xiao Chu's retreating figure, his words heavy with implication. "That old fool is still harboring ulterior motives." Luo Chishu let out a long, weary sigh. "We're all old fools now." Yi Hanqing broached the topic of entering the palace once again. Luo Chishu declined. "Once upon a time, like countless other noble young ladies, I jumped headlong into the fire pit of becoming the mistress of a powerful, high-ranking military family. Now I finally understand love is like a blade that scrapes the very bone. If a man dotes on his wife alone, she will be surrounded by enemies like tigers and wolves, waiting to pounce. If a man shows his wife not the slightest bit of affection, her life will be as cheap and worthless as an ant's." Listening to her calm, rational analysis, a jumble of emotions welled up in Yi Hanqing's heart. He looked at Luo Chishu, alone and with no one to rely on, feeling a profound mix of sympathy for her hardships, compassion for her sincere heart, admiration for her resilience, and respect for her choices. "Then what if I treat you neither too warmly nor too coldly?" Luo Chishu quirked the corner of her mouth into a faint smile. "Your Majesty thinks too simply. In matters of love between a man and a woman, if there is affection, it will be gentle and passionate. If there is none, it will be cold and indifferent. Besides, I'm already at this age. Even if Your Majesty finds me pleasing now, you will grow tired of me eventually." She truly had no desire to enter the palace. She didn't believe she would find happiness there. The last thing she wanted was to get entangled in palace intrigues and end up making a laughingstock of herself in her old age. Outside the palace walls, she was free as a bird soaring in the sky. Xiao Chu valued his reputation too much to dare do anything to her openly. When the palace banquet came to an end, Luo Chishu returned to her courtyard. Nanny Wang and Zixia had made a whole table of dumplings. Waiting eagerly for her return, Luo Chishu graciously tried one and bit down on a copper coin hidden inside. Zixia laughed. "A gleaming copper coin brings boundless wealth, fortune, and health." Amused by her auspicious words, Luo Chishu rewarded everyone with some silver coins. The servants left happily, clutching their money in their hands. The next day, Luo Chishu heard that Xiao Chu had fallen ill. He'd gone out drinking alone in the middle of the night and collapsed on the road back to the mansion. Fortunately, Xiao Fengye had sensed that something was wrong, rushed out with his attendants to search for him, and carried him home. He'd sent for a doctor immediately. After examining the patient, however, the doctor shook his head repeatedly, sighing in dismay. "The old general has long been plagued by old war wounds, the extreme joy and sorrow he experienced yesterday. coupled with excessive drinking and exposure to the cold wind. Now he's running a high fever that won't break. I'm afraid he may not survive this dangerous illness." Xiao Fengye was stunned into silence. He'd never imagined that his father, who had always seemed so strong and healthy, would suddenly collapse like this. His first instinct was to turn to someone for help. But who? Xiao Fengye froze, realizing with a start that the sprawling general's mansion no longer had a master to take charge. He went to find Mu Yunjin first, telling her to take care of his father. Then he personally went to the palace to beg His Majesty to send an imperial physician. After taking care of these matters, he returned to the bamboo garden. Xiao Chu lay on his sickbed, still unconscious. Mu Yunjin sat beside him, dabbing at her tears with a handkerchief. He was fine just a few days ago. How did he end up like this? After the imperial physician inserted the golden needles, Xiao Chu suddenly let out a violent cough, spitting up a mouthful of blood with his eyes still closed. Everyone was thrown into a panic only to hear him mutter deliriously, "Ike." At the sound of that name, the color drained from Mu Yunjin's face inch by inch. Her heart felt as if it had been torn apart, the bitter pain cutting through her like a knife, shredding her broken heart into tiny pieces. "It seems the general will wake up soon. I've been by his side all night. I'll take my leave now." She clutched her chest, rising unsteadily with the help of a servant, and stumbled out of the room. Xiao Fengye turned to look at Mu Yunjin, who had stayed up all night caring for his father. There was no trace of gratitude in his eyes, only cold indifference. If it weren't for Mu Yunjin's existence, his father and mother would never have grown estranged. His father would never have ended up like this. Once a rift formed between two people, it only grew wider and deeper with time. By noon, Xiao Fengye was about to go for his usual lunch, but when he entered the main hall, he saw that the table was filled with dishes, all of them vegetarian. He frowned immediately, asking impatiently, "Why isn't there a single meat dish? The mansion has no money left. We need to cut down on expenses." Mu Yunjin replied with a dark expression. Xiao Fengye was so arrogant and picky. If he were her own son, she would have long ago taken a ruler to him. The atmosphere between them grew tense, thick with unspoken hostility. Suddenly, a servant came running in, his face pale with panic. "It's bad news. The old general's condition took a turn for the worse just now. He's been coughing up blood non-stop in his delirium." By nightfall, the general's mansion was bathed in the glow of countless lanterns. Bright as day, Xiao Fengye had summoned the imperial physician to treat his father with acupuncture, pacing anxiously back and forth along the corridor as he waited for news. Thankfully, within an hour, Xiao Chu's condition stabilized, but the imperial physician's expression was grave this time. "The general's condition is fluctuating wildly. There's no telling when it might take another turn for the worse. I beg you, young master, to make preparations for the worst as soon as possible." The words struck Xiao Fengye like a bolt of lightning. He stood rooted to the spot, stunned into silence for a long time. It was not until the fingers hanging at his sides curled tightly into his palms, the sharp pain jolting him back to his senses, that he spun around abruptly, determined to seek out the person he had long wanted to find yet dared not approach. The moon hung low outside the window. Luo Chishu frowned at the sight of her son standing before her in the dead of night, a flicker of coldness crossing her eyes. "I believe I could report this to the authorities. According to imperial law, trespassing on private property in the middle of the night was a serious offense."
"I truly wish I could walk the path you took." Luo Chishu let out a sharp, derisive laugh, murmuring quietly, "With your health, you couldn't make it even a step." At her words, Xiao Chu's hands clenched tightly into fists. The sound of her footsteps faded into the distance. Yi Hanqing lowered his eyes, his gaze falling on the gravely ill Xiao Chu. He replied coldly, "You will never get the chance." Xiao Chu opened his mouth, his voice hoarse and ragged. "When does your majesty wish for me to take my own life?" In truth, he held his liquor well. The night he'd left the palace after being so deeply provoked, He should never have gotten so drunk that he passed out. But by the time he'd realized something was wrong as he drank that yellow rice wine, his vision had already begun to blur and darken, and in the entire realm, there was only one man powerful enough to have done this to him, the emperor himself. Yi Hanqing sat expressionless in his chair, his eyes fixed on Xiao Chu. I have no need for you to kill yourself. You are already old. You will die soon enough, whether I interfere or not. I merely plotted against you to seize the military power in your hands. Xiao Chu had held onto his military authority for years, all for the sake of Mu Yunjin. How could the emperor not have feared him? Xiao Chu said nothing more. He had never liked Yi Hanqing, not even for a moment. After he handed over the tiger tally, the imperial symbol of military command, to the emperor, Yi Hanqing wasted no time in taking his leave. As soon as the emperor's figure disappeared through the door, Xiao Chu snatched up the pillow from his bed and hurled it violently after him, shouting, "You dog, always coveting what belongs to others." Thud. Mu Yunjin felt something hard strike her head, her vision went black for a moment, and she stumbled, barely managing to stay on her feet. She had thought Xiao Chu would rush to her side, worried for her safety, but instead, he only sneered at her coldly. If you can't even stand steady on your own 2 feet, you'd best go buy yourself a cane as soon as possible. Yes, General, Mu Yunjin forced herself to say, swallowing down the emotions churning in her heart. Xiao Chu looked at the wrinkles gathering at the corners of her eyes, his brows furrowing slightly. What are you doing here? I heard you'd woken up. I wanted to come see you. Mu Yunjin's words were cut off abruptly by Xiao Chu's impatient tone. My illness will pass soon enough. Your presence here is nothing but a nuisance to my peace and quiet. Then he added sharply, are you still not leaving? Mu Yunjin's eyes reddened as she turned and walked slowly toward the door. In a daze, she found herself walking out of the general's mansion, weaving through the bustling crowds until she stood before the small courtyard where Luo Chishu was staying. She took a deep breath and knocked 3 times on the door. A moment later, a servant emerged and led her inside. Mu Yunjin looked around at the blue-tiled courtyard, the small pond, and the flower beds, so elegant, so peaceful. Tears pricked at her eyes again as she whispered, Luo Chishu, I truly envy you. Her words were cut off by a young maid standing nearby, her tone stiff and unyielding. If you envy her, then buy one for yourself. Even if the general's mansion has no money left now, as the saying goes, a starved camel is still bigger than a horse. It can't possibly be so poor that it can't afford a tiny courtyard like this. Mu Yunjin forced a sharp, bitter smile to her lips. Just then, a familiar female voice drifted out from inside the room. Come in. Mu Yunjin took a long, shaky breath and stepped across the threshold. Luo Chishu set down her book and looked her over through her tinted spectacles. She could see not only the blemishes hidden beneath her heavy makeup, but also the sorrow and despair in her eyes. Mu Yunjin closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke, her voice thick with unwillingness. You've won. But it's not that I didn't want you to win. I only ever wanted Xiao Chu. He was my entire world. Luo Chishu's voice was cold and sharp. He was never your entire world, but you gave him everything you had regardless. Mu Yunjin, you're beyond saving. Her tone was not one of mockery, yet Mu Yunjin's face turned ashen all the same. Luo Chishu knew exactly why she had come. If it weren't for Xiao Chu, Mu Yunjin would never have condescended to set foot in her courtyard. But tell me something, Mu Yunjin, what exactly do you see in Xiao Chu? He's old now, and he has no money left. Most importantly of all, he's started to grow tired of you. He no longer loves only you. Mu Yunjin's face turned an ugly shade of crimson. She stumbled to a chair and sat down heavily, her mind in a daze. Memories flooded back. The young Xiao Chu, holding her hand tightly beneath the moonlight and candlelight. His eyes burning with passion. I may not be able to marry you as my wife, Junjin, but here, on the border, you are my one and only love. Even if I am forced to return to the capital someday, my heart will belong to you and you alone. Back then, Mu Yunjin had reached up and tapped him lightly on the forehead, teasing. You'd better keep your promise, otherwise, I'll cut off your head with my own sword. Xiao Chu had smiled, his eyes softening with affection. If I ever betray you, may my gallbladder be torn out and my heart carved from my chest. May my country fall and my family be destroyed. May I never find peace, even in death. But later, the man who had once showered her with such tender affection had stabbed her heart with his cruel words, forgetting the terrible oath he had sworn to her. All men grow tired of the old and crave the new, Luo Chishu sighed. Flowers wilt, and even the deepest love can fade with time. But for you, that day came far too late. So late that you no longer have the courage to leave, but you can survive perfectly well without him. You know, hadn't Mu Yunjin lived a perfectly good life before she'd met Xiao Chu? Even now that she was old, she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. She didn't need him to survive. Mu Yunjin stared down at her hands in silence for a long time, then let out a bitter, self-deprecating laugh. You're right. What do I see in him? Why won't I let go? Why do I stay in this place that suffocates me, that makes me miserable, for a man who isn't even worth it? With that, she stood up abruptly and walked out of the room without looking back. Luo Chishu made no attempt to stop her. It was Zixia, who had just entered the room carrying a plate of fruits, who looked utterly astonished. She's just leaving like that. Luo Chishu only smiled, saying nothing more. In the days that followed, Luo Chishu opened several shops in the capital and threw herself into running them for a time. Then, shortly before the Laba festival, she boarded a carriage bound for Genju. She wanted to return home first, then travel across the rivers and mountains of the realm, seeing all the sights she had missed. But as her carriage was leaving the capital, it was suddenly blocked by the grand, ostentatious procession of the crown princess. The procession was led by imperial guards clearing the way, followed by attendants sweeping the road ahead, servants sprinkling water to keep the dust down, and others scattering flower petals along the path. There were 12 carriages in total, accompanied by countless maids and servants. Zixia and Nanny Wang stared, their eyes wide with amazement. Moments later, a guard clad in iron armor approached, asking Luo Chishu to come with him. Luo Chishu glanced at her 2 worried servants, then followed the guard calmly, through the beaded curtain of the carriage. She could see Xiao Lihua, dressed in a magnificent red robe. Mother has such a long history with His Majesty. Why didn't you ever tell me? I had to find out for myself, she said, her tone sharp. Even though you can no longer be the mistress of the general's mansion, you can still enter the palace as a concubine. Then you would still be my elder and you could still support me. The sound of her calculating thoughts was almost audible, but Luo Chishu was not the least bit annoyed. She replied calmly, Xiao Lihua, it's time for you to grow up. You can't keep relying on others to support you forever. There was a long silence behind the beaded curtain. Then Xiao Lihua burst out laughing. I know. To Luo Chishu's surprise, Xiao Lihua had only wanted to talk to her for a few moments. After their brief conversation, she let her go. Before Luo Chishu left, she said one last thing. The crown prince is not the right man for you. Xiao Lihua did not reply. But as the sound of Luo Chishu's footsteps faded into the distance, she lifted the beaded curtain and stared after her mother's retreating figure, her eyes red with unshed tears. A palace maid asked softly, if you're so reluctant to let her go, why didn't you force her to stay? Xiao Lihua felt as if she'd stepped on a hedgehog barefoot. She suddenly raised her voice sharply. Do you take me for a bandit? That old woman plotted and schemed for me for years, living a lonely life all by herself. Letting her go is my act of kindness for the day, but only she knew the true sorrow weighing heavily on her heart. At the same time, news of Luo Chishu's departure from the capital reached the general's mansion. Xiao Chu was not surprised, but his heart felt as if a piece of it was missing, empty and aching. His hidden guard spoke up cautiously. General, I have some bad news. Xiao Chu snapped back to his senses, frowning anxiously. Has something happened to Aiki? The hidden guard shook his head. She is in good health, General. I heard she even plans to ride a horse back to Genju. Xiao Chu let out a long, relieved breath. The hidden guard added, she was stopped by the crown princess halfway out of the capital, but the crown princess let her go shortly after. Xiao Chu's first instinct was to scold Xiao Lihua for her willfulness and recklessness. But then he paused, thinking to himself, wasn't she doing exactly what he had always wanted to do? Throwing a tantrum whenever she pleased, keeping someone she cared about with just a word. Unlike him, He didn't even have the right to ask her to stay. In an instant, a flood of complicated, bitter emotions washed over him. Xiao Chu's voice was thick with a rare vulnerability. Did you manage to overhear what they talked about? There were so many things he wanted to ask, so many words he wanted to say, but in the end, all he could manage was this one sentence. The hidden guard hesitated. Then mumbled, "No, General, I did not." Seeing the guard's awkward expression, a sudden sense of unease gripped Xiao Chu's heart. He pressed for the bad news he had mentioned earlier. The hidden guard's words fell like a bucket of ice water, drenching him to the bone and leaving him cold all over. Madame Mu went traveling outside the capital. Her horse was spooked, and she fell off a cliff thousands of feet high. There was no way she could have survived. Xiao Chu stood up abruptly, his voice cracking with shock. What? He had been clinging to his health by a thread as it was, forcing himself to stay upright only through sheer willpower. The sudden shock of this news, the overwhelming grief and despair, caused his vision to darken abruptly. The last thing he heard was the sound of panicked shouts ringing in his ears. He slipped into a deep, dark unconsciousness. Xiao Chu had a long, vivid dream. He saw Mu Yunjin standing at the edge of a cliff, gazing longingly toward the distant borderlands. She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "General, I regret ever meeting you." With that, she turned and jumped off the cliff without a moment's hesitation. Xiao Chu rushed forward in a panic, reaching out to grab her, but his fingers closed around empty air. No, he could only watch, helpless, as her lonely figure plummeted toward the bottomless abyss below. The woman who had been the light of his youth, his first love, was gone forever. As the warm morning sun rose in the sky, she fell, and behind him, Luo Chishu appeared out of nowhere, grabbing him by the arm, her voice soft and tender, as if from a lifetime ago. "General, have you no more use for me?" Her eyes glistened with tears. Xiao Chu froze in place, staring at her face for a long time before reaching out hesitantly to touch her cheek. The warmth of her skin beneath his fingertips left him dizzy, unable to tell whether this was a dream or reality. Luo Chishu smiled gently, then stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. At that moment, Xiao Chu's heart felt as if it had stopped beating entirely. The empty, aching hole in his chest was finally filled, but in the next instant, Luo Chishu's expression turned cold and cruel. She pushed him violently off the cliff. The terrifying sensation of falling overwhelmed him instantly. Xiao Chu's pupils contracted sharply as he stared up at the woman standing coldly at the edge of the cliff. "Didn't you and Mu Yunjin swear to love each other forever?" she sneered. "She's dead now. Why don't you go join her in the afterlife?" They say when the old general woke up, his already grey-streaked hair had turned completely white overnight. He looked a full decade older. Zixia gossiped with the maids, munching on a sweet melon from Junju. Luo Chishu, lying on a daybed with a hand warmer tucked in her palms, drifted into a momentary daze. She thought back to Xiao Chu in his youth, the dashing young lord adored by countless ladies in the capital, admired as much for his striking looks as his valor. But now, she felt nothing for him. She shook her head indifferently. So he's old. No one stays young forever. Besides, he got exactly what he deserved. Zixia grinned. "You're absolutely right, my lady." Just then, a knock sounded at the courtyard gate. Zixia hurried to answer it, still clutching her half-eaten melon, and standing at the door was none other than Mu Yunjin, the woman who was supposed to be dead. Mu Yunjin hobbled into the courtyard leaning on a cane, her gaze settling on Luo Chishu. "I came to thank you. Thank her for waking her up to the truth, for inspiring her plan to fake her own death. Otherwise, she would have spent the rest of her life trapped in the endless cycle of love and resentment with Xiao Chu, never able to let go of her past." "You woke yourself up," Luo Chishu said flatly, offering her a plate of shelled nuts a maid had just prepared. "Have some." Mu Yunjin glanced at the nuts, then smiled faintly. "My teeth are too bad for this. You enjoy them." Before leaving, Mu Yunjin presented Luo Chishu with a stack of landscape paintings, scenes of the borderlands. She knew Luo Chishu loved traveling, but hated discomfort. She would never venture to the remote, heavily guarded borders where life was harsh and sparse. But Mu Yunjin had lived there for years, and she knew every blade of grass and every tree by heart. Luo Chishu did not ask where Mu Yunjin was headed. She simply wished her a safe journey. In this bitter game of love, one had spent 30 years trapped in a loveless marriage, only to part ways like flying swallows. The other had waited faithfully at the border for years, only to end up with nothing but heartbreak. In the end, neither of them was a winner. It was not until the final moment that they realized only they could truly protect themselves. Devoting every part of themselves to men and children would only drag them down. Luo Chishu proved to be a shrewd businesswoman, managing her shops with remarkable skill. Word of her success reached Yi Hanqing in the capital, and he simply waved a hand, bestowing 100 more shops upon her. Under her management, their annual profits surged by a full 40%, but she had no desire to spend her days toiling away as a merchant, so on the Dragon Boat Festival of the following year, she sent a memorial to the emperor, asking him to find someone else to take over her duties. She set off to travel the land, departing from Jeonju to see the towering snow-capped mountains and the tranquil crescent lake bathed in moonlight. 3 years passed before she finally returned home. Nanny Wang, who had stayed behind to look after the estate, greeted her with a peculiar expression. "My lady, the young master and his wife have reconciled." Luo Chishu blinked in surprise. "How did that happen?" Nanny Wang explained. Mu Genie stayed at her maiden home for quite some time, but the Mu family was eager to curry favor with the general's mansion, even though the general's mansion was impoverished. It still had a crown princess as its daughter. If the crown prince ascended the throne, the Xiao family would become the emperor's in-laws, an incredibly powerful position. After much deliberation, the Mu family forced Mu Genie to return to the Xiao mansion, but Xiao Fengye, to everyone's surprise, rushed to the Mu family estate and gave them a severe scolding, accusing them of treating their daughter like nothing more than a bargaining chip, and that's how they made up. They even had a baby girl. She's 2 years old now. Luo Chishu took a sip of tea, pausing for a moment before asking, "How do you know it's a 2-year-old girl?" Nanny Wang did not answer. Instead, she turned and walked into the inner room, returning with a swaddled baby in her arms. "When Mu Genie sent the child here, she said you have no heirs of your own. This little girl is your granddaughter. She asked you to raise her, so she can take care of you in your old age." Luo Chishu was equal parts amused and exasperated. She was about to tell Nanny Wang to send the child back when the chubby little girl suddenly broke into a wide, toothless grin at her. Luo Chishu found herself smiling back. What a sweet, sensible little thing. Not long after, a close friend of Luo Chishu's from the capital arrived in Jeonju with her husband, who had come on official business. The two women chatted over tea in a tea house, and somehow, their conversation turned to Xiao Chu. "Oh. 2 days ago was Xiao Chu's birthday." The hall was filled with guests, but he didn't touch a single bite of food or a drop of wine. He just sat there, as if he was waiting for someone. No one dared to eat with him looking like that, so the banquet ended early, but fate is cruel. Right after everyone left, Xiao Chu collapsed. Finally, her friend hesitated, then asked, "Are you going to go see him?" Luo Chishu smiled.